Chapter 5:17. Half of the fire elemental monster's body was still stuck in the ground. The lava that had condensed into its body was collapsing from head to toe. The lava sizzled and spread across the courtyard, turning into a ball of boiling lava that stood on the spot. That's it? What happened inside? Peter scratched his head in confusion. He had thought that it would be a fierce battle. He did not expect that it would end so anticlimactically. It should be, right? You're asking me? Who should I ask? Scott was also surprised. Puff! Suddenly, the lava on one side parted. Eddie walked out in his poisonous form. The lava still stained the surface of his dark body. If the flowers and plants on the ground had not been melted by the high temperature, Peter and Roland would have thought that the lava was just an illusion. Eddie shook off the lava on his body and glanced at Peter and Scott. Scott was just about to greet him when Eddie suddenly jumped up on the spot. Accompanied by a blast of air, he jumped dozens of meters high and landed on the outer wall of a tall building. He then climbed up nimbly and soon disappeared among the tall buildings shrouded in the night. Ugh! Scott's hand froze in the air. He withdrew it awkwardly. What's wrong with that guy? Peter shrugged at him. He looked around at the deserted streets and suggested, let's get out of here quickly. Yes, escape is more important. Scott then remembered that he was still a fugitive. He quickly nodded, pressed the battle suit's controller, and turned into the size of an ant to escape. It's been a long night. Hopefully, I still have the energy to wake up and go to school tomorrow. Turning his sore arms left and right, Peter looked at the PIM technology company that had been reduced to ashes. He squatted down slightly and jumped up. He spat spider silk in the air, shuttled between the tall buildings, and disappeared into the night sky of the city like Eddie. In the divine palace above the 9 realms. As expected, a mere mortal is still an unreliable piece of trash even if he's endowed with energy from the origin stone. Loki, who had disguised himself as Odin with a spell, sat in the glorious and silent palace with a gloomy face. He tapped the floor with his golden scepter. However, he had expected this. After all, Earth was the territory of a group of superheroes. It was not that easy to intervene. The mysterious guest, Quentin, was only a slightly stronger cannon fodder, a tool to explore the chessboard of Earth's forces. To deal with them, I have to rely on superior candidates with special talents who are stronger. Loki pondered for a moment and flipped his right hand. The tesseract appeared and he used it to open a small cloud of spatial fog. Through the wormhole, he could see that on the other side was a basement space, where 2 humans, 1 male and 1 female, were imprisoned. Both of them were in their early 20s. The man had a head of vigorous silver hair and was handsome. The woman had long crimson hair and was sexy and beautiful. They also vaguely carried the strange energy related to the infinite primordial stones. It's you guys. Loki revealed an exclusive evil smile. At the same time, that night, in Tony's personal studio at the headquarters of Stark Industries. Tony Stark did not know that Peter was participating in the battle on the street. He was now busy in the studio with Jarvis, who was fully invested in computing power. Phew. Jarvis, test it again. Tony, who was wearing a singlet, wiped the sweat off his forehead and looked seriously at the large composite manufacturing machine that was built with complex parts and had a great sense of craftsmanship. Yes, sir. Jarvis responded quickly and operated the laser scanning machine from top to bottom. The test is correct. All parameters are normal. In theory, as long as there are enough materials and energy, it can build a brand new driving armor in 3 minutes. It will be controlled automatically by the second artificial intelligence derivative system. It can be thrown into the emergency battle to protect Earth in 5 minutes. Finally, it's done. Tawny looked at the production machine. His tired body slumped down on the ground. Jarvis continued, "Sir, please give the second artificial intelligence derivative system a name to create a brand new data database. Tani thought for a moment and said firmly, then let's call it Ultron. Next, the world of Earth will enter the era of Ultron, and we will have the power to fight against extraterrestrial forces. The future world will usher in change at this moment. In the office on the top floor of the unnatural firm, a glass ripple appeared in the air in the room. Then, Kale and Yutong walked out and returned to the real world from the mirror dimension. Yutong's red lips opened slightly and said softly, "Boss. It seems that the few people you selected are still very talented. As long as they continue to be trained and honed, they will definitely be able to shoulder the heavy responsibility of protecting Earth in the future. It would be great if that was the case." Kale shrugged. Of course, this was what he wanted to see. Only when Earth's forces were strong enough could he leave Earth at will and do what he wanted without any burden. If it weren't for the fact that he had too many concerns in his heart, he probably would have already killed his way to Thanos' base and taken Lorna back. This really isn't like me, Kale shook his head. Of course, he remembered his past debts more clearly than anyone else. Whoever owed him, whoever offended him, he would make them pay back tenfold or even 100-fold in the future. It wasn't that he didn't care, it was just that the time wasn't right. Yutong, Tani sighed. Kale was just about to say something when he suddenly stopped. His body trembled, and a bright light flashed past his eyes. Seeing Kale's abnormality, Yutong stepped forward and gently held his arm. "Boss, what's wrong?" Kale said, the connection that had been broken suddenly reconnected in a short instant just now. Reconnected? What do you mean? Yutong understood almost instantly. Her beautiful eyes lit up. Yes, it's with the doppelganger. Kale's breathing quickened, and he clenched his fists. It can't be wrong. In that instant, I sensed his existence, and he sensed me too. It's just that we're very far apart, even farther than the distance between Earth and the divine territory. It's as if we're separated by a whole world. Where did the other me go? Kale was surprised. The doppelganger and the main body were originally one. Their souls were the same, but their bodies were different. Their thoughts were similar, but their personalities were different. Kale's main body had experienced the cruel Second World War, the Galactic Arena, the Milky Way Alliance campaign, and the Divine Territory's large-scale war. He had killed gods and slain dragons. It could be said that his existence was the ultimate war machine. Killing was a common occurrence. Therefore, he was indifferent, dignified, and full of killing intent. He had a sense of oppression that was difficult to hide. As for Superman's doppelganger, because he had experienced too few battles, he was also treated as a young master and a child in the original world. He would be slightly more comfortable, mischievous, sunny, gentle, and more like an ordinary human. Kale narrowed his eyes and said, "No matter where he is, we have to find him and bring him back. The other me might be the key to reversing the future." With Superman's doppelganger Caesar and him in his double star form, who could withstand a double fight? Chapter 518. In the original Kale, even the eyes of the god's domain's gatekeeper couldn't reach a place far away. This place was separated from the Marvel Universe by dozens of parallel worlds. It also had the Earth and the Milky Way, similar culture and war history, and was also a new world shortly after the end of World War II. 1962, summer. England, near the University of Oxford, in a cheap bar that didn't care about the identity of the guests. After nightfall, the place gradually became lively. The citizens who got off work would come here to drink a few drinks to release the pressure of the day, or look forward to a chance encounter and a night of indulgence. A blonde beauty sat on a high swivel chair in front of the bar. Long wavy blonde hair fell over her shoulders. Her appearance could only be regarded as above average, but her eyes were blue and green. There was a different kind of beauty in this incongruity. Especially. At this time, the blonde beauty was looking around. It seemed that in the bar hall, she was constantly looking for the person she wanted to find. Her eyes were full of expectation and confusion, which made her a lot of points. Melancholy and confused beauties in bars usually attract heterosexual idiots, heterochromia. When the blonde beauty was still looking for someone, suddenly from behind her, a young man in a suit with wax on his hair suddenly approached her and said, "Your eyes are very rare, very beautiful. It's the beauty of life reflected by the gene mutation." Amy looked back. She had to admit that the young man who came to hit on her was very young and handsome. He had a kind of weak but steady bookish aura. Between his gestures and words, he was like a famous professor standing in a church and chatting happily. Seeing Amy look over, the young man smiled and introduced himself. "My name is Charles Xavier, you can call me Charles." A few meters away, Raven, who had transformed into a tall girl and looked like an ordinary person, cast a resentful look at Charles. "My name is Amy. I have to say, the way you pick up girls is a bit special." Amy turned her face away with a little disappointment and said coldly, "If it's a normal day, I don't mind you treating me to a drink and chat. But tonight, I'm afraid not. Are you waiting for someone?" Charles seemed to be interested. He wanted to dig a little bit into the secrets hidden in other people's hearts and brains. This was probably a bad habit of his mutation ability. He pressed his left hand against his temple and was about to read Amy's mind when the wooden door of the bar suddenly opened with a creak. Another person entered the bar. Late at night, in a bar in a bustling neighborhood, it was normal for people to come and go. But after the new guest entered the bar, the atmosphere of the entire bar fell silent. It was as if everyone's emotions were attracted by that person. Charles and Ruiwen looked in the direction of the door and saw a tall and handsome blonde youth walking into the hall. Yes, tall and handsome. It was often overused in modern times, but the young man in front of him was definitely the representative of this term. The golden-haired youth was nearly 1.78 meters tall. He was tall and slender, with broad shoulders. He looked like a sculpture of golden proportions. The long-sleeved casual suit was slightly supported by his muscles, and the exposed skin leaned towards the healthy texture of wheat. He glanced over. The youth's appearance was only above average, but he was very good-looking. The more you looked at him, the better he looked. There was a hidden masculinity in him, and there was something called aura that couldn't be described. As for why he was a youth and not a young man, it was because he looked too young. He was estimated to be around 18 years old. He was a veritable handsome youth. "Newman, give me a glass of brandy." The voice was magnetic and powerful. The golden-haired youth ignored the strange gazes of others and went straight to the side of the bar. He waved at the bartender familiarly. Apparently, he was also a regular of this bar. After the golden-haired youth entered the bar, all the women's faces were pink. They ignored their partners and frequently cast flirtatious glances at him. The men clenched their fists and regarded him as the number one male enemy. After waiting for a week, he finally came. Looking at the youth, Amy's beautiful eyes moved. She almost immediately went up to hit on him. "Miss Amy, the person you're waiting for is him, right?" Charles's mouth twitched slightly. "Don't tell me I'm waiting for you." Amy rolled her eyes at him. "I advise you not to provoke him. Otherwise, there won't be any bones left." Charles patted his forehead. Ruiwen next to him also nodded with deep feeling. Amy turned back and looked at Charles. "You know him?" "It doesn't look like it. How can an old gentleman like you know such a pure sunshine youth?" What pure sunshine? Charles was speechless. If the current beauty knew that the first time she hit on a girl in her life was taught and encouraged by the youth, I don't know how she would feel. "Caesar." Charles couldn't help but take the lead to call out the youth's name. "Oh." Caesar heard the voice, picked up the brandy handed to him by the bartender, took a sip, and walked towards Charles and the others. He glanced at Charles and Ruiwen a few meters away. Charles, Ruiwen. Long time no see. In fact, he already knew that Charles was here, but he didn't want to disturb him from hitting on girls. Caesar, I haven't seen you for a few years. Ruiwen nodded to him. She was not surprised that Caesar recognized her transformation and camouflage at a glance. Caesar, he can do it. Whether it is me, who can transform and camouflage at will, or Charles, who can read minds, the only one I can't figure out is probably Caesar, who has lived under the same roof for 10 years. I don't know his origin, age, ability, etc. But fortunately, Caesar is not an enemy. On the contrary, Caesar is their teacher and friend. He is more like a child and an ordinary person. He has been living his life as he wants, as if he has no plans or dreams for the future. Give them both a pint of bitter beer and juice. Caesar pointed to the bartender, pointed to Charles and Ruiwen, and then put his brandy on the table. If you don't mind, you can try this glass first. With just a few words, he had taken control of the situation. That maturity that was beyond his age made Charles feel ashamed. It also made the women in the bar unable to sleep at night. Of course. I don't mind. With her face stained with pink, Amy sat softly on the chair, holding the glass with both hands. She was already in the stage of falling. You are hitting on girls in front of me. This is not good. It will damage my reputation as a nightclub professor. Charles looked at Caesar, who stole the limelight, and suggested, "What have you been doing all these years? I haven't seen you for so long. Do you want to come back to my house tonight? Let's get together." "No, I still have an appointment tonight." Caesar smiled, patted Charles on the shoulder, took out $100 bill from his pocket and put it on the table. "Next time. Charles, I'll come to your house next time." He waved his hand and walked to the door. He came quickly and left quickly. He's still the same. Ruiwen covered her mouth and chuckled. Yeah. Charles looked at Caesar's back as he left, then looked at the $100 bill on the table, shook his head and muttered, in the words of the East, "It's really hard to see the dragon's tail." Before he finished speaking, there was a crash next to him, and the glass was broken on the ground. Amy anxiously followed Caesar's figure and chased out of the bar. But when she opened the wooden door, the streets outside were busy, and there was no trace of Caesar. Next to the bar, on the rooftop of a building up to 30 meters high. I didn't expect to meet them again. It has been 18 years since I came to this world. Facing the gentle night wind, Caesar was standing on the wall, looking down at the modern streets, and his heart was filled with emotion. That's right. When Caesar shuttled through the quantum field and wanted to return to his original time and space and join his original body, Kale, due to an accident, he came to a new time and space world and has spent 18 years here. Superman's body is constantly repaired and perfected, but he has not found a way to return, and he is wandering in this world. This is the X-Men universe. There is no Captain America, no Stark Industries, no SHELD, no the Avengers, and no Hydra organization. It is a new world where mutants and ordinary people coexist. The next place, I hope I can find a way to return as soon as possible. Caesar looked at the end of the night sky on the left and suddenly ignored gravity and flew up into the air. Under the layers of sonic booms in the air, he shot into the vast night sky like a missile. Chapter 519. Caesar set off from Oxford, England, maintaining a height of 1 kilometer as he flew out of the Atlantic Ocean at top speed. He flew out of the land and into the sea. The Mach speed, which was far beyond modern aircraft, made Caesar seem to be moving against the time difference. The thick darkness in the sky gradually dissipated, and the stars, moon, and sun were obviously reversing. From time to time, he would shuttle through the clouds, leaving a long white trail in the sky. From time to time, he would fall down like a meteorite, skimming over the surface of the sea, raising a straight line of huge waves behind him, frightening countless seagulls and fish. In less than half a minute, the outline of a new continent appeared in front of Caesar's eyes. It was America on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, where the United States was located. The time difference between England and the United States was a full 5 hours, so it was already late at night in England, but night had just fallen in the United States. The bright and swaying city lights dotted the land. Crossing the inland desert, Caesar arrived at Las Vegas, where he had an appointment tonight. Similar to the world of Marvel, Las Vegas was also the largest city in the United States, and also a city with a high international reputation. It was world famous for tourism, shopping, and vacations centered around gambling. More than 10 years after the end of World War II, the world's overall economy recovered, and the city was much more prosperous. There's still plenty of time. Caesar looked at the sky and landed on the rooftop of a building in the city block. He slightly tidied up his hair that was messed up by the wind. 1 minute to cross the Atlantic Ocean, 6,000 kilometers, to attend another banquet. Probably no one would believe it if he told them. Caesar thought about it and entered a local high-end clothing store to try on and buy a suit for the banquet. It had to be said that clothes make the man. This sentence was applicable in any situation. After Caesar changed from casual clothes to a fitting suit, his outstanding temperament was even more difficult to hide. The female employees and customers in the store couldn't take their eyes off him. After taking a small note with the phone number of the female employee, he went to the high-end banquet in the bustling city block. Hellfire Club. The power of the boss behind it was unknown. It only received the upper class, and there were many internal security personnel. The guests who were qualified to come here were either rich or respectable. The entrance of the Hellfire Club was luxurious and majestic. Caesar had just stepped forward when 2 security men in black suits and sunglasses subconsciously reached out to stop him. "Excuse me, please show your identity or the club's invitation." "The invitation, I remember it's in," Caesar muttered. He reached into his suit, took out a golden invitation, and handed it to one of the security guards. The security guard took the invitation and opened it to read. His originally serious face suddenly became extremely surprised. Another security guard leaned over and saw the identity note on the invitation. He was also stunned and rubbed his eyes, suspecting that he had seen wrongly. "Why? Is there a problem?" Caesar looked at them calmly. "No, no problem at all." The security guard came back to his senses, folded the invitation in his hand, and respectfully handed it back to Caesar. He said respectfully, "Your Excellency the Duke from the United Kingdom, welcome to the banquet. Please come inside." "Duke of England?" The faces of the other ladies and gentlemen who were dressed in gorgeous attire at the door changed instantly when they heard this address. What kind of concept was a duke? In the aristocratic royal families of Europe, it could be said that their status was second only to the king, and they were considered the princes of the Eastern countries. Especially after World War II, the United Kingdom no longer conferred nobility. The title could only be passed down by the original one. As time passed, it would become fewer and fewer until it completely disappeared. What rich and famous people in the new era! The real dukes and aristocrats completely looked down on them. After all, the land they ruled and their backyard was the size of a city. They were really rich and had a deep heritage. It was rare for a duke to appear in such a place, not to mention such a young duke. "Thank you." Caesar nodded, picked up the invitation, and smoothly walked into the club. Since he came to this time and space and couldn't go back for the time being, he had to find something to do. The most important thing was that he needed a new identity. More than 10 years ago, before the end of World War II, Caesar rescued the high-ranking British royal family in a war turmoil. Coupled with some reasons, he cleverly got the identity of a duke. It just so happened that the United Kingdom stopped conferring nobility that year, and he was the last and the youngest duke in the United Kingdom. With the identity of a duke in the United Kingdom, Caesar didn't need to disguise his identity anymore. He could use it to go to any upper-class banquets and activities in any country. There was only one purpose for this: to collect enough information about the world he was in and find a reliable way to return to the original time and space. Inside the Hellfire Club. The interior decoration was more luxurious and high-end than the exterior. The neon lights on the ceiling swayed and shone, and music flowed in every corner. Security guards could be seen standing against the walls of the hall. Beautiful and sexy women were basically wearing bikinis, revealing a large part of their skin. They were escorting guests who were either bald or big-bellied as they walked into the private rooms. When Caesar walked into the hall of the club, almost all the ladies without appointments looked at him in unison. Their eyes were green as if they were hunters who had found their prey. "He's mine. Don't fight with me for him." The three girls, who thought they were pretty and slim, took the lead and walked toward Caesar from different directions, tiptoeing like cats. "Mister," some of the ladies quickened their pace and wanted to talk, but Caesar shook his index finger and stopped them from approaching. Caesar stretched out his hand to the left and took a glass of wine from the passing bartender's plate. He sat in the corner of the public sofa in the hall. He didn't want to talk to the ladies or make an appointment. This made many of the ladies leave with a regretful expression. "The quality is not bad," Caesar commented softly and tasted the wine. No one knew if he was talking about the wine or the ladies. It wasn't that he didn't want to get close to women, but under his superhuman sense of smell, he could tell the cleanliness of the ladies with just a sniff. What's more, he often went to such places and didn't lack beautiful encounters. What he lacked was only useful information. Shaking the sweet wine in the glass, Caesar gently closed his eyes and released the restrictions on his ears. Hundreds of thousands of voices poured into his ears without missing anything. Under his superhuman brain, he calculated and selected useful information. "Come, give me a kiss, chick, Colonel Hendry, why is he here?" Recently, the United States plans to deploy missiles in Turkey, which may become the fuse of the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States. I lost another 1 million today. Is the Third World War about to start again? Bars, banquets, and event venues gathered people from all walks of life. If he could collect all the information they shared every day, he could easily crush the intelligence department of a big country. Sure enough, no world can avoid the occurrence of war, even if there is no Hydra organization here, Caesar muttered to himself. In this time and space, because there was no symbol of peace in Captain America, there were no superheroes as the benchmark of the era. Since the end of World War II, there were more Cold Wars and secret disputes between big countries than in the world of Marvel. However, as a person from another time and space, Caesar didn't want to intervene in the war. In the world of Marvel, his original body as a symbol of peace was tired enough. His avatar didn't want to repeat the same mistakes. Chapter 520. Caesar sat on the sofa in the club hall, savoring the fine wine while collecting all kinds of information. After a while, he saw Colonel Hendley, who was holding a girl in each hand, walking toward one of the private rooms with curtains under the lead of a woman who was wearing a plush cloak. She was wearing revealing clothes for such an entertainment occasion, but she still had the aura of an empress. In the club hall, all the security guards subconsciously stepped aside, not daring to block the woman's steps. The regulars who came often didn't come forward to talk to her. Although they looked at the woman with obscene and conquering eyes, there was more fear that was difficult to hide. If one had a deep understanding of the Hellfire Club, they would know that the woman was the legendary behind-the-scenes boss. The Hellfire Club was loved by the upper class and was popular in both the underworld and the underworld. It wasn't an ordinary nightclub. As the behind-the-scenes boss of the club, the woman was naturally not an ordinary high-class girl. When the curtain of the private room was put down, White Empress's beautiful eyes swept across the lively hall, and her eyes paused on Caesar. She frowned slightly, feeling that she had seen him somewhere before, but she quickly put down the curtain without leaving a trace. "It's getting more and more interesting," Caesar lowered his eyes, leaned back comfortably on the sofa, raised his neck, and finished the fine wine in the glass in one gulp. He snapped his fingers at the passing bartender. Another glass of brandy. Yes, sir. The bartender took the glass respectfully. At this moment, another young and sexy girl walked in from the entrance of the club hall. The girl had long dark blonde hair that reached her waist. Her appearance was considered top-notch in this place where beauties gathered. She had a good figure and a healthy tan, which made people's eyes light up. She was also wearing a sexy black bikini, but she was a little embarrassed. Her hands were slightly nervously placed on her lower abdomen, and her bare feet were slightly tiptoeing on the red carpet. Several middle-aged gentlemen who were still in the hall had a slight change in expression. They rubbed their palms and quickly surrounded the girl like wolves who smelled blood. In the Hellfire Club, the guests had the right to choose the girl, but the girl didn't have the right to choose. Whoever made the reservation first would be the one. When the girl saw several people approaching her, she couldn't help but shrink back. Just as she was about to find a reason to refuse, she didn't expect that someone would suddenly step forward and reach out to hold her small waist without any excess fat. With a cry of surprise, she directly took it into her arms like it was her possession. "I'm sorry, I've already made a reservation." Caesar held the new wine glass and hugged the girl with a smile. The woman was stunned. Her mind went blank, and she forgot to resist for a moment. The other middle-aged gentlemen who were a step too late looked at the youth who had the intention to snatch it away. Their originally refined and gentlemanly faces immediately froze. The corners of Caesar's mouth curled up as he walked towards the sofa with the girl in his arms, leaving behind the middle-aged gentlemen with ashen faces. Little brat. As a senior diplomat of Italy, Griff had never suffered such humiliation. He was about to confront Caesar, but he was stopped by two old friends. "Forget it, Griff, it's not good to cause trouble here." "That's right. Give some face to the Hellfire Club. When we get out of here, we'll slowly settle the score." Hearing his friend's advice, Griff glared, blew his beard, and angrily looked at Caesar's back as he walked away. Well, he's lucky. Bringing the girl to a corner, Caesar first sat down on the sofa, then pulled the girl into his arms and handed the shaking wine glass to her lips. "Come, drink with me." The girl was still in a half-dazed state. She cleverly opened her lips and took a sip of wine. 2 clusters of red floated on her white cheeks. Caesar maintained his smile and continued to shake the wine glass. Looking at the lip marks left on the edge of the glass, he also took a sip of wine and commented, "Not bad." The girl finally reacted. She was molested by a boy 5 years younger than her. She subconsciously wanted to break free from Caesar's arms, but Caesar held her body tighter and whispered in her ear, "You are not a girl, right?" The girl's heart was in turmoil. She no longer resisted and pretended to be confused and whispered, "What are you talking about?" Caesar smiled and held her slender hand. He leaned close to her earlobe and replied, "There is a hard skin on your right index finger. Although it's not obvious, it's obvious when I touch it. It's very inconsistent with the rest of the smooth parts. This is because you've been using guns for a long time." "I practiced self-defense. Can't I?" The girl was still stubborn. Caesar blinked and said, "Yes. But as a girl, your body is too clean. If you're inexperienced, I can teach you at night." "You, little bastard." She was obviously much older, but she had been molested several times. The girl was defeated again. The boy in front of her was definitely a wily old fox. Even so, she didn't show any panic. Since the boy knew that she was not a girl and still helped her out, it meant that he didn't mean any harm. "My name is Caesar. What about you, sister?" Caesar hugged the girl and continued to taste the wine. "Mora. According to our age, you should call me sister." Mora raised her head discontentedly and glanced at Caesar unhappily. But at such a close distance, she finally saw his face clearly. In addition, their noses were almost touching, which made her bounce away as if she had been electrocuted. Before she bounced a few centimeters away, Caesar pulled her into his arms again. "Be careful. The security here is watching." "Damn it. I'll bear with you." Mora gritted her teeth. If the CIA training center knew that the female devil who had beaten down countless male agents was lying in the boy's arms like a docile cat, it would cause a sensation. "Good girl. That's right." Caesar smiled faintly. "Now that we know each other, can you tell me where you came from and your purpose?" "Of course not." Mora refused decisively and then hesitated. "Unless you help me distract the security in the hall." "Forget it. You can't do that anyway." "Then it's a deal." Caesar suddenly let go of Mora and stood up from the sofa, which made Mora feel inexplicably disappointed. In a trance, she saw Caesar walking directly to Griff and the other two who were still in the hall. What does he want to do? Mora was stunned. Griff and the other two were drinking and chatting, looking for a new girl when Caesar walked up to them. Griff saw that it was Caesar, and before he could react, his face was suddenly slapped hard. Slap. The extremely loud slap sounded in the hall of the Hellfire Club, making the guests cover their mouths in horror and attracting the attention of the security on duty. What are you doing?" Griff held his injured left cheek and looked at Caesar in exasperation. His red face quickly swelled up. "Nothing. I remember that you glanced at me just now. I was very upset, so I slapped you to vent my anger," Caesar said matter-of-factly and took out a white handkerchief to wipe the palm of his hand. Griff's eyes were burning. He said angrily, "Are you deliberately humiliating me? Do you know who I am?" No, I'm not targeting you alone." Caesar threw away the handkerchief and said lightly, "I'm saying that you and the two behind you are garbage. You've dirted my eyes. Please get out of my sight right now." As soon as this extremely arrogant sentence came out, the whole hall of the Hellfire Club was in an uproar. Chapter 521. The social way of upper-class people and celebrities was often one thing on the surface and another in the dark. On the surface, they called you brother and were polite and modest, but behind their backs, they were always scheming against each other. For example, on a dating platform like the Hellfire Club, the guests would show some mercy to each other and would not offend each other. And today happened to be an exception. There was no other reason, just because he didn't like you, so he slapped you in the face in front of everyone. Caesar still maintained a gentle smile. If Griff's face was not red and swollen, the guests next to him would have thought that everything was purely an accident. His casual but arrogant words made the guests gasp. Even Mora, who was in the corner of the hall, was stunned. "This is an opportunity." Mora saw a group of security guards surrounding Caesar and suddenly came to her senses. She quickly got up from the sofa and went to Colonel Henley's private room. At this time, the focus of the people in the hall fell on Caesar. Naturally, no one noticed Mora's action. What? Caesar glanced at Mora's back, like an unforgiving playboy. Without waiting for Griff, who was flushed with anger, to speak, he continued to ask, "I said you're trash, are you not convinced? Little bastard, I'm going to kill you, I'm definitely going to kill you." Griff couldn't stand it anymore. His hair and beard exploded in anger, and he pounced on Caesar who was standing in front of him. Caesar neither dodged nor defended, as if he was looking at a clown. When Griff was 1 centimeter away from him, several tall and powerful security guards suddenly rushed out and held Griff's limbs, not allowing him to move again. "What are you doing? You got the wrong person. It's him who is making trouble. Do you know who I am?" Griff's eyes were bloodshot. He struggled desperately and screamed at the top of his lungs, but he couldn't get rid of the security guard's shackles with his own strength. The security guards wearing sunglasses were indifferent and pressed Griff to the ground. "I'll leave him to you. I don't want to see him again tonight. Caesar didn't pay attention to him and turned sideways to the main supervisor, who hurried over. The pot-bellied supervisor wiped off his cold sweat and hurriedly nodded, "Yes, Your Excellency. I'm really sorry, but everything is on the house tonight. I hope you can have a good time." Caesar nodded slightly and walked towards the sofa in the hall. The onlookers consciously made way for him. "I'm sorry, Mr. Griff. It's not that the club doesn't want to give you face, but who told you to offend someone you shouldn't have?" The supervisor looked at Griff and shook his head regretfully. He ordered the 2 security guards, "Send him out of Las Vegas." "Duke. Duke?" Griff had already given up on resisting, muttering to himself, his face pale and bloodless. In this kind of club, the security guards were not the police. They would not care who was right and who was wrong. Whoever had a higher status would be the right side. How could a mere Italian ambassador be compared with the Duke of a large country? Caesar returned to his original position on the sofa, but Mora, who disguised as a girl, had disappeared. "Did you sneak in?" Caesar smiled faintly, sitting on the sofa, picked up the wine glass and continued to taste the wine. But his eyes narrowed slightly, looking at Colonel Henley's private room. His blue eyes glowed, and the curtain that originally blocked his vision was penetrated by his superhuman eyesight. Everything inside was suddenly visible. Caesar, clearly, saw that the private room was empty. He focused his vision and saw the things behind the inner wall of the private room with his X-ray vision. There was a very hidden dark room in the private room. Behind the wall was a study room. There were various world maps and intelligence files on the desk in the study room. Mora, who had sneaked in, was squatting beside the desk, twisting her hips and skillfully flipping through the cabinets to look for intelligence files. "This technique, is it from the CIA?" Caesar shook his head and thought. At this moment, Mora, who was in the dark room, seemed to have heard a strange sound and couldn't help but look at a dark room deeper in the study room. Caesar's expression changed and also looked over. Although the deepest room was a dark room, it was spacious and luxuriously decorated. There were comfortable conference tables and chairs inside. In the second dark room, White Empress sat together with a middle-aged man, and a non-mainstream young man dressed in a suit was sitting on a high chair and drinking alone. Colonel Henley, who was the guest, was sitting on the other side of the 3 people with his legs crossed. The middle-aged man and Colonel Henley seemed to be talking about something. The negotiation failed, and both of them looked unhappy. Caesar released part of the restriction of his superhuman hearing, and the conversation that was separated by several walls immediately entered his ears. Colonel Henley stared at the middle-aged man and sneered, "Mr. Shang. You want me to change my mind and agree to deploy missiles in Turkey? That's basically impossible. You and I should both know that once missiles are deployed in Turkey, the Soviet Union will definitely take action. If it triggers a war between the 2 countries, it's not something that you and I can take responsibility for. Colonel, don't jump to conclusions too early." Shang's face turned slightly cold. "Then there's nothing to talk about." Colonel Henley frowned and vigilantly touched the pistol at his waist. "Let's change the way of negotiation." Shang clapped his hands. The non-mainstream young man heard the reminder and immediately stood up. He stretched out his left hand, and a whirlwind appeared on his palm. As the whirlwind spun, it kept getting bigger and bigger, evolving into a small tornado. "You! What did you put in my wine?" Colonel Henley stood up in horror. He mistakenly thought that the other party had put something in his wine, causing him to have a strange hallucination. The non-mainstream young man pushed his palm forward, and the whirlwind floated forward, sucking Colonel Henley into it. He was thrown up 3 or 4 meters high, and then he fell heavily on the sofa. Colonel Henley struggled to get up, took out his pistol, and shot at Shang. White Empress stood up directly in front of Shang, and her body turned into a sparkling diamond at the same time. "Dang! Dang! Dang!" Dang! The bullets landed on White Empress's diamond body, but it only caused some sparks. It didn't cause any damage. Colonel Henley opened his mouth in despair, and the pistol fell from his hand. It was obvious that he had given up resisting. Very powerful, isn't it? A superpower derived from a gene mutant. Shang looked at him with a smile. In the face of absolute strength, all power and wealth were illusory. Colonel Henley was silent and leaned on the sofa in surrender. He knew that he couldn't resist the mutant among humans. "Where is Demon Azazo?" Shang asked. White Empress tilted her head and blew a sharp and loud whistle. Under the glow of a red flame in the dark room, a young man who looked like a demon with red skin inexplicably appeared in the air and reached out his left hand to Colonel Henley. Colonel Henley hesitated for a moment, but still held his hand. The red flame reignited, and the two disappeared from the dark room at the same time. In just a short while, the three mutants all showed their unique talents. This scene was not only seen by Mora from the CIA, but also by Caesar, who was in the club hall. 4 mutants. Caesar whispered to himself. He was getting more and more excited. In the Marvel universe, humans with unique abilities were rare. They were either villains or superheroes. In the current X-Men universe, due to the prominent mutant genes, mutants continued to appear in the human population, and the number was as many as tens of thousands. Most of these mutants were hidden among ordinary people, such as Charles and Ruiwan at the moment. The X-Men universe was a universe where real talents were born, and there were as many superhumans as dogs. Chapter 522. Mora slipped out of the dark room in a state of shock. What she saw tonight was beyond her imagination. The superpower that was spread around the world like magic really existed, and some people began to use it to intervene in the politics of major countries. Colonel Henley is already under someone else's control. If he changes his mind, then the Turkish frontline will most likely deploy missiles. As an excellent CIA agent, Mora naturally understood the pros and cons. She took a few deep breaths to calm herself down. Coming out of the private room, Mora subconsciously looked at the corner of the hall. The young man named Caesar who was sitting on the sofa just now was long gone. He was nowhere to be seen in the swaying neon lights in the hall. Mora's eyes dimmed, but she quickly pulled herself together and walked to the entrance of the Hellfire Club. On the road next to the Hellfire Club, a small black car was parked. After Mora walked to the car, the window rolled down. A slightly bald middle-aged man was sitting in the driver's seat. "How is it? Nothing happened inside, right? I told you, a club of this level wouldn't be so easily caught." Before the middle-aged man finished speaking, Mora opened the back door and sat inside. She interrupted him and said, "Bob, quickly connect me to the highest officer in the CIA." Bob's eyes widened in shock and he screamed, "Are you crazy? The highest officer should be discussing matters at the Turkish frontline base now. Cut the crap, I have something very important to report." Mora's eyes and tone were firm. Bob hesitated and reached out to the hidden communication device in the car. He sighed helplessly and said, "Forget it, let's wait and write the report together." After connecting with the highest officer in the CIA, Mora gave a simple report of what she saw in the Hellfire Club, including the strange abilities revealed by the mutated humans and the threat to Colonel Henley. In the end, she anxiously concluded, there must be something wrong with the Hellfire Club, or it may directly affect the deployment of missiles in Turkey. "What are you talking about, Agent Mora?" In the central control room of the U.S. military base in Turkey, the highest-ranking officer of the CIA was sitting on a chair. He looked at Colonel Henley, who was talking casually, and said into the phone in a low voice, "Colonel Henley is sitting not far from me." "You saw him in the Hellfire Club?" "Unless he traveled nearly 3,000 kilometers in 10 minutes. Mola frowned slightly, and the image of the devil-like man appeared in his mind. "Don't waste my time," the highest-ranking officer said impatiently and hung up the satellite phone. Hearing the busy tone on the other side of the phone, Mora could only put down the phone and raise his neck to lean against the soft back seat. As a veteran of the CIA, Bob had already expected this. He said, "Like I said, without sufficient evidence, intelligence is sometimes useless, especially when it involves supernatural phenomena such as mutants and such. I'm not that easily discouraged," Mora said stubbornly. She suddenly thought of something and asked, "Bob, do you know a boy named Caesar? Just now when I was in the club, he even helped me out. Could it be that you secretly sent someone? How is that possible? There are only 2 of us here tonight." Bob shook his head decisively. Suddenly, he was stunned and looked at Mora in surprise. "You said his name is Caesar?" "Yes, he looks very young, about 17 or 18 years old. Blonde hair, blue eyes, outstanding temperament, about 1.8 meters tall, and a strong and fit body." Speaking of this, Mora remembered the intimate contact just now and blushed unnaturally. Fortunately, the light in the car was dim, so Bob didn't notice it. Bob's face became serious, and he said solemnly, "Hearing what you said, it should be him." "You know him?" Mora asked in surprise. "Of course not, I just heard of him." Bob was silent for a moment and organized his words. "Caesar. The last Duke of the United Kingdom, and also the youngest one. His birth and parents are unknown. In the CIA's archives, he can even be ranked in the top 3 for the lack of information." "Duke? That little man is a duke?" Mora covered her mouth with both hands. Although she knew that Caesar's identity was not ordinary, she was still shocked to know his true identity. "Yes. Speaking of the origin of his duke identity, it's also a mystery." Bob smiled bitterly. According to the archives, Caesar was recorded more than 10 years ago, before the end of World War II, and the flames of war in some areas were still burning. He saved an important member of the United Kingdom's royal family and was conferred the title of Duke. He paused and continued, "But think about it, more than 10 years ago. How old is Caesar? How could he save the royal family of a big country? Then it can only be fake." "He was conferred the title because of other reasons," Mora said. "You're not the only one who thinks so. Many people think so too. There are also rumors that Caesar is the illegitimate son of the Queen of England." Bob spread his hands and said, "But no matter what, he was still conferred the title of Duke. Think about it, a child of a few years old, carrying more power and wealth than a family, what would happen?" This was self-evident. After being conferred the title, not only were some outsiders envious of Caesar, even the members of the royal family would attack Caesar in various ways. But why now? Mora's eyes widened. Under such circumstances, Caesar was still growing up healthily. Bob smiled bitterly. "That's why it's all a mystery. I only know that those who attacked Caesar, whether openly or secretly, all died mysteriously, without exception. To this day, he's still active in the upper-class social banquets of big countries. He won't even give face to the big bosses of big countries, and no one dares to compete with him. He seems to be a playboy, but in fact, he's relying on himself." "What kind of person is he?" Modu's beautiful eyes shone with a strange light. Bob solemnly reminded her, "I advise you, it's best not to be curious about him. Although the CIA collects intelligence, there are some people and some things that we can't touch. If you fall into it, you won't be able to pull yourself out." "I know." Although Modu said so, she secretly planted a seed in her heart. "Sir, I don't believe you." "Then, what do you want to do next?" Bob asked. Modu said, "I want to find a doctor who studies mutant genes. He might have a way." At this moment, at the U.S. base about 3,000 kilometers away from the Hellfire Club. Because Colonel Hendley changed his mind and agreed to deploy missiles in Turkey, the U.S. generals in the control room were arguing. No one noticed that directly above the US base, about 1,000 meters in the air, Caesar, in a suit, faced the high wind and floated in the air, ignoring gravity. He looked down at the base fortress that was dotted with lights. His deep blue eyes seemed to penetrate the steel plate and see everything in the control room. Chapter 523. On the roof of the UA base fortress. Under the cover of the thick night, the man who was in the same group as the Hellfire Club, known as Demon Azazo, was standing in a blind spot and was not detected by the surrounding monitors. Azazo was wearing a black gentleman's suit, and his red skin turned dark red under the night. He was like a bat beast, quietly leaning against the window, maintaining a squatting position, and peeking at the military meeting unfolding in the central control room. Colonel Hendry. Once the missiles are deployed in Turkey, we can launch missiles at the Soviet Union that they can't intercept at any time. This obvious signal will stimulate the Soviet Union. Do you still insist on the decision? The CIA's highest officer looked at Colonel Hendry and asked in a deep voice. Yes. Colonel Hendry's face was calm as he said with certainty, I still think it is better to deploy missiles in Turkey and take the initiative. This is not a random thought, but a decision I made after careful consideration. The CIA's highest officer frowned. It should be known that Colonel Hendry was resolutely against it before, but for some reason, he suddenly changed his mind 180 degrees. He then remembered the information that Agent Mora had just reported, about the Hellfire Club being strange and the possibility of Colonel Hendry being bribed. After Azazo confirmed that Colonel Hendry was on their side, he took out the satellite communicator in his suit pocket, dialed it, and calmly and concisely reported, "It's done." Shang's slow voice came from the communicator. "Very good, watch him. When he goes to a place where there is no one, tell him to meet again the day after tomorrow. He will get what he wants." "Okay. Tonight, Azazo nodded and replied, but suddenly, his words stopped abruptly as if he saw something unbelievable. His beast-like red-brown pupils kept shrinking. "What's wrong? Azazo, what happened?" Shang could hear the abnormality in his voice and could not help but ask in surprise. "That's all for now, I will report to you when I get back." Azazo decisively hung up the communicator and put it back into his pocket. Only then did he coldly look to the side. He did not know when, but a blond boy was also standing on the roof of the fortress, quietly watching him from less than 5 meters away. "Have you finally noticed me?" Caesar revealed a bright smile and smiled at him. Azo's muscles tensed up. Even with his beast-like senses, he didn't notice when the other party had approached him. "Are you also a mutant?" Azazo asked tentatively. This was the only explanation. Only a mutant could do this. Mutants? Let's not count them for now. Caesar blinked. He was a Kryptonian and could not be considered a pure human being. Naturally, he was not a genetically mutated mutant. However, this was not the main point. Caesar stared at Azo and threw out a bunch of questions with great interest. "What you used just now was a teleportation talent, right? Teleportation? Or a fixed-point teleportation? Are there any restrictions on time and distance?" "You saw it." Azo's expression changed drastically. He did not expect that his biggest secret, a crucial part of the Hellfire Club's plan, would be seen and exposed by a big boy on the spot. Complicated thoughts raced in his mind. Azo looked at Caesar with a cold gaze, and a murderous intent rose in his heart. Caesar shrugged as if he could read his mind. "You want to kill me? I advise you not to do that." Azo did not speak. He looked at Caesar, who was 5 meters away, and reached for the dagger hidden at his waist. At such a close distance, with his teleportation ability, he could appear behind the boy almost instantly and kill him silently. But just as he put his hand on the dagger and prepared to assassinate, in the face of Caesar, who was in a defenseless posture, Azo felt as if he had fallen into an icehouse. A chill surged from his tailbone to his spine, and his body and mind froze at the same time. Die, he would die. Azo's forehead was dripping with cold sweat. He was called Devil and Red Devil not only because of his red skin, but also because of his sharp senses, which were comparable to a beast's, which had saved his life many times. But just now, the moment before Azo was about to attack Caesar, he clearly smelled the scent of death. He would die. If he attacked the boy in front of him, he would definitely die. He had not attacked yet, but the fear had already been engraved in his bones. This was the mutated gene in his body, and it was frantically ringing the alarm bell, telling him to immediately stay away from the boy in front of him. Azo's body trembled, and then with the emergence of the red flame, he escaped into the void and disappeared from the top of the US base fortress. You're smart. It's rare to encounter a mutated ability that interests me. Don't let me down. Looking at the red shadow disappearing in front of him, Caesar smiled instead, and then looked at the distant forest on the left side of the base. 10 kilometers away from the Turkish US base fortress, in an uninhabited forest. With a whoosh, a ball of crimson flame appeared in the air. Azo arrived in the forest. His left hand was supporting himself against a pine tree while his right hand was wiping the sweat on his forehead. He muttered to himself, "Who is that person? Are you talking about me? My name is Caesar." Without any warning, a loud voice rang out from behind. Azo's hair stood on end, and he looked back. Caesar was standing 5 meters behind him, looking at him with boredom. "Are you a human or a ghost?" Azo took a deep breath, his back pressed against the pine tree. "Of course I'm a human." Caesar shook his head, looked at him, and analyzed, in the blink of an eye, "You came here 10 kilometers away. It seems that you don't need to teleport to a specific location. Is it a higher-level teleportation talent?" Azo gritted his teeth, turned into a red flame again, and disappeared into the forest in an instant. "You're really tenacious." Caesar shook his head helplessly and stepped hard. A white wave of air burst out, and under the falling leaves, he instantly broke through the sound barrier and soared into the sky. This time, it was no longer a kilometer in the sky, but with the clouds as the base, Caesar broke through the atmosphere and came to near outer space where he could see the round outline of the Earth, bathing under the direct sunlight. Caesar looked down at the blue planet below, closed his eyes, and released the maximum limit of his superhuman hearing. Complex and tedious sounds immediately rushed into his ears, and his brain processed them at a speed far faster than the calculation speed of a supercomputer. Did he escape to America? He really looks like a rat. Caesar quickly opened his eyes and looked to the north. His body swooped down, and he became a meteor that cut through the night sky. America, Las Vegas. In almost an instant, he crossed 3,000 kilometers. Blazing with red flames, Azo appeared from the void and fell on the desert in the suburbs. Huff. Huff, struggling to get up from the sand, Azo panted heavily. Continuous long-distance teleportation consumed a lot of his physical strength. But fortunately, as long as he got rid of that strange person called Caesar, it would be a blessing. Azo's mouth was dry, and he saw that there was a stoat's shop dozens of meters in front of him. He didn't care about his strange appearance and walked toward the stoat's shop. As he approached the stoat's shop by the desert road, a gust of wind blew up. Azo was in a daze, and he saw someone on a chair at the door waving at him. An illusion? Azazo was stunned. Caesar sat on a chair outside Sto's, drinking beer with his head tilted back. He shook the unopened bottle of beer in front of him. "You must be thirsty. Do you want to stop and have a cold beer?" Chapter 524. Hellfire Club, Underground Secret Room. Just 3 minutes ago, we lost contact with Azazo. Shang sat on the sofa with his legs crossed. His hands were clenched so tightly that they made cracking sounds. His face was so cold that frost was about to condense on it. His words caused the hall to fall into a brief silence. The non-mainstream youth who had the ability to rapidly rotate his body had a face full of surprise. How is this possible? Even the White Queen frowned and pondered. Maybe something has happened, right? Or is it a satellite signal problem? With Demon Azatso's instant teleportation ability, even if he encounters something he can't handle, no one can stop him as long as he wants to run. It's because of this that I'm worried. Shang loosened his clenched fists and said coldly, Genos, Emma, we have to speed up our original plan. If we continue to delay, there might be other changes. Okay. Understood. The non-mainstream youth and White Empress nodded. Their faces were a little more dignified and excited. If the expected plan succeeded, the Third World War that would engulf countries all over the world was about to begin. On the other side, 30 kilometers away from the Hellfire Club, in front of the straw shop on the outskirts of Las Vegas. Gesturing to the iced beer in his hand, Caesar looked at Azatso with a smile. But at this time, in Azatso's eyes, the smile of the young man in front of him was comparable to the evil grin of a demon. You are a monster? Azatso held it in for a long time. His face that was already red looked even darker and uglier. In the past, others called him a monster and a demon. This was the first time he had described someone in this way. One could imagine how much shock Caesar had brought to him tonight. I've already said, my name is Caesar. Caesar stood up from the wooden chair and walked a few steps closer. He stared at Azatso and looked him up and down. He shook his head with slight regret. 2 rounds of 3,000 kilometers and you're already a little exhausted? It's too short. It seems that what you have mastered can only be considered as a long-distance teleportation ability. To be considered as a super long-distance teleportation ability, it would at least involve other planets and enough to cross the starry sky. For example, Marvel's Rainbow Bridge, Teleportation Gate, and the Dimensional Stone. I'm short. Azo felt like he was being looked down upon, but he didn't know how to refute. After all, Caesar had returned to America earlier than him, yet he didn't even pant. So you still have a tail. Caesar glanced sideways at Azo's back. There was a red tail that looked like a demon from hell. It swayed left and right like a cat, and the tip of the tail was like a sharp bayonet. Don't force me. As Azo spoke, he took out a pair of daggers, one in each hand. I won't kill you. You can come and try. Caesar shrugged. He raised his left hand and extended an index finger, as if he wanted to use it as a weapon. Stop joking. Azo let out a furious roar. He was a red devil, a demon among demons. He was between a human and a beast, but he was a higher mutated life form. He was usually the nightmare of his enemies, the king of assassins, but now he was forced into a desperate situation. Azo no longer cared about fear. He turned into a red flame and disappeared. The next moment, he appeared behind Caesar. He was in the air, and the daggers in his hands and the spike in his tail were aimed at the back of Caesar's head, neck, and heart. Caesar didn't move half a step. At the critical moment, his index finger stretched out like lightning and flicked 3 times. Then, the daggers in Azo's hands and the spike in his tail were all bounced back. How is this possible? Great pain came from his perlicue and tail, but the shock in Azo's heart was 10 times greater. There was no time to think. Azo's body frequently turned into red flames, and he constantly teleported short distances. He switched back and forth between Caesar's side, and the daggers in his hands and tail in his hands continued to launch a fierce attack. There was a series of clanking sounds as sparks flew. Within 5 seconds, Azo had teleported over a dozen times, launching a barrage of attacks at Caesar's body. But no matter what angle he attacked from, be it with his twin blades or his tail, Caesar was always able to react in time and block all the attacks with a wave of his index finger. Cold sweat had already soaked his collar. The more Azo tried to attack, the greater his fear of Caesar's strength. The other party didn't predict the next teleportation location in advance. Instead, he made a timely response in the extremely short interval between the teleportation and the attack. He used the index finger of his left hand all the time. He didn't use his right hand, nor did he move half a step. What kind of astonishing superhuman reaction was this? Azo didn't know that to Caesar, as long as he opened up his senses, the flow of time was different from ordinary humans. Humans often described the short period of time when they couldn't react as instant or moment, but Caesar could use this moment as 10 seconds or a minute. Ha! Azo teleported in front of Caesar one last time and stabbed his daggers at Caesar's eyeballs. This time, Caesar didn't know if it was because his reaction was too slow or because of some other reason, but he could only watch as the daggers closed in. Was I careless? Azo was so excited that his entire body was trembling. But before he could smile, the daggers that stabbed Caesar's eyes seemed to have stabbed into hard, refined steel. The daggers, which couldn't bear the weight, immediately broke. Azo's smile completely froze and disappeared. As if he had lost all his strength, he knelt in front of Caesar and looked at the shattered daggers on the ground. It turned out that, the other party didn't need to defend or dodge from the beginning. Even the eyes, which were the weakest part of the human body, were as hard as steel marbles. Unimaginable movement speed, reaction speed, extraordinary strength, and a body of steel, Azo's mind went blank. He finally understood why he had the feeling that he would die in the beginning, the difference in strength. The difference in strength was like a natural chasm. The strength of the two of them was on a completely different dimension. If mutated human broke the 10,000-year shackles of human genes and took the first step of rapid evolution, then Caesar was already standing at the peak of the evolution pyramid. A truly perfect evolved human? Superman? Only Superman can describe it, right? Azo looked up at Caesar, completely in awe and submission. Why, not fighting anymore? Caesar looked at him in surprise and urged, continue, you can try teleportation again. At most, I won't fight back this time. Azo lowered his head and said, I lost, master. Master? What is that? Caesar was a little confused. He was only interested in the teleportation talent and wanted to find a way to return to the original Marvel world. So, he kept chasing Azo for experiments. Azo said matter-of-factly, you are the strongest person I have ever seen. Naturally, you are my master. I don't need subordinates. Too troublesome. Caesar decisively refused. After thinking for a while, he suddenly took off at the speed of sound and disappeared into the desert night sky like a meteor. Looking at the disappearing star, Azo was also stunned. He took the initiative to seek refuge, but was rejected without hesitation. Chapter 525. At noon the next day. Oxford University, England. After the professor's lecture on genetics, Charles, who was wearing a suit, and Wuxia, who had transformed into an ordinary woman, walked out of the school gate side by side. In the eyes of third-party students, they would be an enviable couple. After all, the man was young and handsome, and the woman was tall and beautiful, and they lived in the same house as childhood sweethearts for more than 10 years. Wuxia secretly looked at Charles, who was walking with her, and sighed in her heart. Unfortunately, she was a different kind of mutant. If she didn't transform and disguise herself, her ugly appearance would probably be treated as a monster. It was also for this reason that Charles, who usually indulged in wine and women, couldn't have sexual interest in her. Do you want a drink? There's a drinking contest in the bar today. Charles said to Wuxia, who was absent-minded. Okay. Wuxia nodded obediently. No matter where it was, as long as Charles was there, she would go. It might be good to go on like this. In a bar near Oxford University, in the hall. Drink. Dozens of guests gathered in a group and cheered. Charles had taken off his coat, held a long glass with both hands, and gulped down the beer. Some beer was spilled directly on his white shirt. He was totally different from the professor who stood on the podium during the day. 5 minutes later. "Are you okay? I told you to drink less." Ruewen supported the slightly drunk Charles and leaned on the chair at the bar. Charles spread his hands indifferently and muttered, "I can drink more. I'll get you a wet towel to wipe your face." Ruewen looked at him with heartache and turned to walk out of the door. Charles leaned on the chair at the bar and was in a daze. A beautiful figure approached him. "Are you Charles Xavier, the youngest professor of genetics at the University of Oxford?" Charles looked up in confusion and saw that it was a well-dressed sexy woman who came to him and asked. It was Mora, who came here from the United States to ask for help. Mora saw him looking over, so he went straight to the point. "Professor Charles, you have published a paper on genetic mutation before. I want to know if the kind of humans you are talking about now, who are walking at the forefront of evolution due to genetic mutation, have already appeared in this world?" Charles frowned. He was indeed a little drunk. Under the influence of alcohol, his head was a little dizzy, but the topic of gene variant still attracted him. He subconsciously put his finger on his temple and stared at Mora. In less than half a second, his mind entered the other's consciousness and read the reason why Mora had this question. In the consciousness generated by Mora's brain, the first thing that happened was Caesar's appearance and the things that happened in the Hell Club. It was as if he had experienced it himself. Charles shivered and completely sobered up from his drunkenness. Same kind, they were actually other mutants, and there were so many of them. "Professor? Professor?" Looking at the dazed Charles, Mo stretched out his hand and waved it in front of his eyes. Then he said helplessly, "It seems that you are drunk. I will talk to you when you are sober." "There is no need for that, Agent Mora." Charles smiled faintly and looked at her. "Before you asked me this question, didn't you already know the answer? Don't worry, if the target is those mutants, I will do my best to help you." "That's great." Mora was both surprised and happy. She breathed a sigh of relief and said, "I want you to prove the existence of mutants in front of the CIA officers." "No problem." Charles agreed without hesitation. He never wanted to hide his mutant talent for a lifetime and pretend to be an ordinary person to get along with ordinary people. Another day later, at the CIA headquarters. Although Charles had already made up his mind, and he and Raven had taken the initiative to reveal their respective mutated talents, namely mind-reading and shape-shifting abilities, the CIA officers not only refused to accept this fact, but also reprimanded Agent Mora. This was also what Charles expected. Humans were often more afraid of the unknown. They would rather avoid it than understand it in depth. It required a long transition period to accept it. Except for one officer. The head of the CIA's military weapons research, Jenner, was a tall fat man in a bulging suit. After the meeting, he chased out of the room and expressed his willingness to let Charles and Ruewen join them to test Shang's strength and influence. In any case, this was a milestone in history. It was the first cooperation between mutants and government forces. After nightfall. Near the coast of the United States, in a slightly remote bar. Caesar randomly chose to come here. As an ordinary customer, he continued to taste good wine and collect interesting information. This kind of wandering in a different time and space was not bad. Sha sha sha, acutely hearing the sound from the top of the bar, Caesar glanced above his head. When he saw Red Devil lying on the top of the building, quietly waiting under the moonlight, he could not help but shake his head. "You came here again? What a troublesome guy. Of all people, you just have to follow me. Let's see how long you can follow me." Creak, at this time, the wooden door of the bar opened. A tall young man wearing jeans, a leather jacket, a wide-brimmed hat, and a bag on his shoulder walked into the bar lobby. A glass of whiskey. The tall young man sat down at the bar next to Caesar and spoke to the bartender in a low voice. Caesar looked at him from the side, but his eyes became brighter and brighter. The aura of the other party was too similar to the Lorna he knew. He was probably the only one who had a similar aura to Lorna's and gave off the feeling that the strength of his ability was definitely no less than Charles's level, Magneto, Eric Lancel. He didn't expect to meet him, the #1 Marvel mutant with the ability to control magnetic fields. When Caesar looked at Eric, Eric also looked at him in return. His sharp eyebrows raised slightly. He felt an ominous aura from Caesar. "What are you looking at?" Eric said coldly as he took the whiskey from the bartender. Caesar smiled and said, "Brother, I'm sorry. There's a strong smell of blood on you, and at this moment, there's an unconcealable aura of revenge lingering around you." Eric's pupils contracted slightly, but his face remained calm. He raised his head, drank the whiskey in the glass in one gulp, and put the glass on the table with a bang. He said in a low voice, "So what? If I want to kill someone, do you want to stop me, or do you want to call the police?" "I won't do that. It's too troublesome." Caesar shrugged. "Then you don't have a problem with me killing you now, do you?" Eric narrowed his eyes dangerously. He was like an injured and mad beast, maintaining a certain degree of hostility toward everyone, let alone the youth who had guessed his intentions. Only Caesar noticed that a few rusty screws on the wooden wall not far from Eric were quietly loosening, as if an inexplicable force was controlling them. Caesar said indifferently, "I have no objections. But the premise is that you can kill me." "That's what you said." A murderous intent appeared in Eric's eyes. The screws had separated from the wooden wall and were suspended in the air, ignoring gravity. The tips of the screws were all aimed at Caesar. Chapter 526. Inside the bar. Caesar and Eric were less than a meter away from each other. They looked at each other, and under Eric's magnetic manipulation, a few screws slowly floated up, ready to shoot out like bullets at any time. Caesar didn't seem to notice the potential danger. He maintained a calm smile on his face, oblivious to the fact that the Grim Reaper was holding him by the throat. Eric's killing intent swelled to the maximum. His fingers moved slightly, and he was about to manipulate the screws to teach Caesar a lesson. However, at this critical moment, a hand suddenly landed on his shoulder from behind. So fast. Eric was shocked. He didn't notice that a tall man was standing behind him. The tall man was wearing a suit with leather gloves on his hands and a mask that covered most of his face. His entire body was covered so tightly that not a trace of his skin was exposed. Under the dim light of the bar, a pair of beast-like eyes stared at him. "Don't attack him. This is for your own good." "Same kind." Red Devil Azatso lowered his body and whispered in Eric's ear. "Who are you?" Eric narrowed his eyes. His fingers moved slightly, and the screws changed direction, aiming at Azatso's head. Azazo replied proudly, "I am the one who serves the Supreme Sovereign, Red Devil Azazo." Caesar's forehead was full of thick black lines. "What the hell is this?" Eric was also shocked. He didn't say a word, and no one knew what he was thinking. "Have you seen a finger blade?" Azatso said to himself. Eric raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Finger blade?" "Yes, a finger can be used as a blade. It's invincible, and no one can move it," Azatso was about to explain, but Caesar suddenly left his seat and grabbed something behind him. Just like that, under the dumbfounded gaze of the other customers, he dragged Azatso, who was taller than him, out of the door. "We'll meet again." Caesar didn't even turn his head. He waved his hand and dragged Azatso's tail out of the bar. "Two weirdos." Eric snorted and put down his hand. The screw suspended in the air was once again controlled by gravity and fell to the ground. However, Caesar's guess was right. His hands reeked of blood, and his body was surrounded by the negative aura of revenge. Tonight, he was indeed going to kill someone. It was still a massacre. Bill. Eric threw a small piece of gold that looked like a tooth on the table and hurriedly left the bar with his backpack. The bartender looked at the small piece of gold on the table and shrunk his neck in shock. He muttered with lingering fear, "They really are, three weirdos." Late at night. Moonlight shone on the coast of the United States, and a large luxurious white speedboat was moored on the sea. The internal members of the Hellfire Club, Xiang, Emma, and Janos, stood on the top deck of the speedboat and looked down at Colonel Henley, who was slowly walking up the ladder. "Dear Colonel, welcome to join us. I believe there will be a lot of cooperation between us." Still, with a kind smile on his face, walked up to Colonel Henley alone. Colonel Henley's face was gloomy. He walked to the top deck of the speedboat and came in front of Xiang. Suddenly, he took out a high-explosive grenade from his pocket and pulled the trigger of the grenade with his other hand. "Give me money. $1 million, I will leave the United States completely. This is my only condition. Otherwise, I will detonate the grenade." "Colonel, you have chosen the worst path." The smile on Xiang's face disappeared. He was not afraid of the grenade. Instead, he took a step forward and encouraged him, "Go ahead, I don't mind." Colonel Henley's hand was trembling slightly. Only then did he realize that he was threatening a group of lunatics who wanted to start a war, and a mutated human with unknown abilities. "If you don't want to pull, then I will." Xiang smiled and took the grenade from Colonel Henley's hand. Then, he pulled the trigger of the high-explosive grenade in front of him. The grenade immediately turned into a shockwave and exploded. At the moment before that, Xiang suddenly put his palms together and controlled the shockwave to a very small area, absorbing all the energy of the shockwave. Colonel Henley's mouth was wide open, and he did not know what to say as his only trump card was easily resolved by the other party. "I will give it back to you." Xiang stretched out two fingers and gently tapped on Colonel Henley's shoulder. A dazzling energy was transmitted. Colonel Henley's mouth moved, but before he could say anything, he turned into a pile of ashes and dissipated into the sea. White Empress Emma and Janos had been watching silently. They completely treated Colonel Henley as a clown. Xiang, as the boss behind the Hellfire Club and the leader, was the strongest mutated human among them. Xiang. The mutated ability was to absorb the energy that the body came into contact with and convert it for their own use. They could use it to enhance their strength, speed, and endurance, or reflect the absorbed energy back. This ability could be said to be the real nemesis of firearms. "Beautiful." Emma stood up and clapped her hands. She suddenly raised her eyebrows and blurted out, "Someone is coming." As if confirming her warning, Eric, who had changed into a diving suit, jumped over the railing from the shadow of the lower deck of the speedboat and came to the top deck of the speedboat. He stared at Xiang coldly. "It's you." Xiang showed a surprised expression. Of course, he remembered the mutated humans that he had cultivated and studied, not to mention Eric, who was a talent with an extraordinary mutated ability. "Yes, it's me." Eric smiled coldly. "Be careful, he wants to kill you." Emma's expression changed drastically. She quickly transformed into a diamond body and stood in front of Xiang. Just as he did that, a few bayonets were fired at Xiang and hit Emma's body with clanking noises. Eric raised his left hand and wanted to continue controlling the bayonets. But Emma was faster than him and used a powerful telekinetic wave to attack his brain. "Ah!" Eric held his head with both hands and growled in extreme pain. "Go!" Janos used his fingers to create a fast-spinning torrent of wind that blasted the defenseless Eric off the speedboat and into the sea. Xiang looked at the sea that had returned to silence and ordered, "Let's leave this place quickly." "Yes." Emma nodded. At this moment, a bright light shone on the luxurious speedboat from several hundred meters away like a pillar. Looking at the illuminated surface of the sea, several U.S. warships could be seen approaching from the coast in an encirclement. There's a mutated human on the other side. He's using telekinesis to locate us. Emma, who was returning to her human body, turned into a shiny diamond body again and said quickly, "Run." Even Shang could not maintain his composure and took the lead to rush to the bottom deck of the luxury speedboat. On the deck of a certain American warship. There's someone with similar abilities on the other side. He blocked my telekinesis. Charles pressed his fingers against his temples and said anxiously to Captain Jenner beside him, "I can't help you. You can only rely on yourselves for the rest." On the sea beside the luxury speedboat. Don't even think about escaping. As a head popped out of the sea, Eric's face was ferocious. He raised his left hand high and magnetic force came out of his body. The chains of the speedboat's anchor floated from the bottom of the sea and slammed violently into the speedboat. Chapter 527. On the road beside the shoreline. Most of the night was filled with couples walking back and forth hand in hand. Caesar was the only one who dragged Azazo by his tail as he paced back and forth. "What's that? A tail? It's probably an ornament. It's disgusting. Stay away from these two weirdos." Many passers-by were pointing at Caesar and Azo. However, when Azo kicked them, they scattered in shock. "You finally acknowledged me, master," Azo said happily. "Acknowledge your head." Caesar walked to the shore and lifted Azo up with a little force. Then, he threw him 5 meters into the sea. "Wah!" Azo exclaimed. The moment he touched the water, he turned into a ball of flame and disappeared. The next moment, he returned to Caesar's side. "You're really annoying." Caesar could not bear to look at the ability of instant teleportation. "Thanks for the exaggeration." Azo revealed a row of clean teeth. Just as he was about to say something, he heard a strange sound coming from the sea. He could not help but look in the direction of the sound. About a few hundred meters away from the shoreline, 3 American warships were heading towards a luxury speedboat. The luxury speedboat also suffered a mysterious attack. A thick iron chain used for anchoring rose up like a snake and slammed into the front of the luxury speedboat, penetrating it. The chain then continued to move forward and cut the speedboat apart, causing explosions and flames to spread everywhere. "That's Mr. Shang's boat," Azo widened his eyes in shock. He subconsciously wanted to teleport over to save them. However, before he could use instant teleportation, a hand landed lightly on his shoulder. "Don't go over. Otherwise, I'll kill you." Caesar's words were very calm. However, in Azo's heart, it was like a bolt of lightning. Caesar's killing intent was very faint. However, if he really teleported over, he would definitely die. That was without a doubt. Caesar's killing intent was definitely much less than Kale's, but that did not mean that he would not kill. To him, killing was as easy as opening the cap of a soda before drinking it. Would you want to kill the cap of a bottle? It couldn't be, right? Just to drink the soda inside, he could open it without hesitation. "Got it." Azo nodded obediently. "Take a good look. There are so many mutants gathered here tonight," Caesar said. "Not only Magneto, but also White Empress and the others, even a certain professor who had yet to lose his hair had come." Boom! Boom! Eric floated on the surface of the sea. His face was tense. His right hand grabbed the air in front of him, manipulating the iron chain that weighed several tons to whip the luxury speedboat. Soon, the speedboat was completely sunk into the sea. "It's him. I didn't expect him to be so powerful." Azatso had a certain level of night vision. When he saw Eric sinking the speedboat on the sea, he recognized that it was the mutant he saw in the bar. He couldn't help but exclaim. "That's magnetic field control. If it can't even deal with a speedboat, then this ability is too cheap. Caesar argued. Right now, Magneto's control over his abilities wasn't even as good as Lorna's. When he fully developed this ability, he would be the villain who would cause everyone's expressions to change. It was the same for the professor. They were still too young, but it was precisely because of their youth that this was the era that truly belonged to them. Eric looked at the speedboat wreckage that sank into the sea, but he still stared at the surface of the sea. There was an undercurrent surging at the bottom of the sea beside him. Through his magnetic field control, he could clearly sense that a small submarine was quickly escaping towards the deep sea area. Don't even think about escaping. Stay here. Eric's face was ferocious. He no longer held back. Even if he was sinking to the bottom of the sea, he had to free up his hands to use his ability. The small submarine carrying Shang and the others was pulled by the magnetic force. Its speed slowed down, but it still continued to drive deeper into the sea. The force indirectly pulled Eric from the surface of the water and kept pulling him down to the bottom of the sea. Just then, a warship came to the sea nearby. On the deck, Charles looked agitated and shouted, "There's someone in the water. Another mutant. He's about to drown. We have to save him." But the American soldiers couldn't confirm the location and were still searching left and right. In a hurry, Charles jumped into the water from the deck. Using his mind to lock the position, he dived to the bottom of the sea and soon grabbed Eric's shoulder. Eric was still trying to pull the submarine with his magnetic field. His face was already red and he looked like he was going to die together with Charles. "Let go. If you go on like this, you'll die." Charles reached out and grabbed Eric, using his mind to enter his brain and directly conveyed his meaning through his heart. Eric was almost exhausted. Looking at the submarine getting farther and farther away, he finally deactivated his magnetic field ability and followed Charles to the surface. "Your consciousness drilled into my brain." Eric gasped for air. "Sorry, I couldn't help it." Charles's hands were still on his shoulders. Eric spat out seawater and said vaguely, "I thought there were very few people like us, Eric." Charles smiled and said firmly, "From today onwards, you are no longer alone. It's really a fated meeting." On the coast, Caesar watched all this silently. Magneto and Professor X were the origins of the two mutant forces. In the future, the epic war of love and hate in the X-Men universe would also begin from this moment. However, that had nothing to do with him. He was just a wanderer. He just needed to find a way to leave this space and time as soon as possible and return to the Marvel universe where his body existed. "Let's go." Caesar turned and left. Go?" Azo was stunned for a moment, but he quickly reacted and excitedly followed Caesar. "Yes, let's go." "Go." "Master, slow down, wait for me. Just call me young master in the future. As for you, how about Little Red?" Young master, can you change the name?" "Then Big Red." The figures of the two stretched on the coast and soon disappeared together at the corner of the street. In an extended version of a black Buick, Officer Jenner sat in the main driver's seat and drove Charles, Roy-1, Mora, and Eric, who was rescued in the sea, to a secret military base under the protection of military forces. "You will like this place. This is where the CIA studies military combat weapons and defense. I am the overall person in charge and the highest officer here." Jenner proudly parked the car in the open space, got out of the car and led Charles and the others inside. "Why do I have to go with you?" Eric's face was cold, and he was carrying his own backpack on his shoulder. Charles immediately advised, "Eric, we have a common enemy. Those people from the Hellfire Club are very strong, and it is very dangerous to fight them alone. What's more, even if you have the confidence to defeat them, you can't find where they are now." "Okay, I will stay for the time being." Eric nodded. He had to admit that Charles, as a professor, had a way of teaching and guiding others. Then let's stay here for the time being and find a way to deal with those people. Rui Wen took the lead and followed Jenner into the building. The discussion went on for an unknown amount of time. When the meeting ended, everyone returned to their assigned rooms to sleep. Charles yawned and walked in the corridor. He saw Mora leaning against the guardrail alone, looking up at the moon in a daze. "What are you thinking about?" Charles walked towards her. "Can't you read minds?" Mora saw that it was Charles and could not help but roll her eyes at him. Charles said seriously, "I usually don't peek into other people's thoughts." "As if I believe you." Mora looked at the moon again and said, "Professor Charles, I heard that you once lived with Caesar." What kind of person is he?" Hearing the name Caesar, the expression in Charles's eyes became complicated. Chapter 528. A moon peeked out from the dark clouds, and the bright moonlight shone on the open space of the base. Charles bent down slightly, with his hand on the corridor railing, and looked sideways at Mora. "Why do you suddenly want to know about Caesar?" Mora turned his face away, not wanting to answer, but he was afraid that Charles would read his mind directly, so he could only dodge. "According to you, isn't he also a mutated human, and a noble duke of the United Kingdom? If he can join us, maybe we can increase our chances of winning against those people from the Hellfire Club." "Him?" Charles's mouth twitched. "Is his mutated ability not suitable for fighting?" Mora looked at him in surprise. "No." Charles shook his head. "Rather than saying that his ability is not suitable for fighting, it's more accurate to say that I don't know what his mutated ability is." "How is that possible?" Mora was really surprised this time. "This is the truth. Although we have lived under the same roof for several years, the only person I can't see through is probably Caesar." Charles said this and helplessly spread his hands. "My ability, since young, has never been able to enter Caesar's consciousness. Even when he was sleeping, when he was most defenseless. If the consciousness of an ordinary person is like an ordinary house, you can enter as long as you find the door. Then his consciousness is like a super safe with layers of encryption." What kind of person is he?" Mora opened his mouth slightly and asked this question for the second time. "How should I put it?" Charles scratched his head and pointed to the sky outside. "He comes from the sky." "The sky?" "Yes. I was less than 10 years old at that time, on the night I met Rui Wen. Caesar fell from the sky like a meteorite and smashed a hole in my yard. Even so, he was still unscathed. He, who was homeless, naturally stayed in my house temporarily." "You're also a complete weirdo." Hearing Charles's answer, Mora didn't know what to say. Was it something an ordinary person would continue to let an unknown person stay in his house? Mora caught the key point and said, "Wait. So, Caesar was only 3 or 4 years old at that time?" "Yes. He was much younger than us. Originally, Rui Wen and I treated him as our younger brother. But after we became familiar with each other." Charles had a complicated look in his eyes as he said, "At that time, Caesar was already more mature than expected, and, due to my mutated ability, my brain's development was far beyond that of ordinary people. I had a photographic memory when I was learning, and I could learn anything as soon as I started. I was undoubtedly a super genius. But when I get home, I still have to ask Caesar for help if I don't understand anything. I'm a special existence that is both my teacher and my friend." Mola said thoughtfully, "Caesar is also a genius?" "Genius?" Charles couldn't help but laugh. "I've never seen him study. It's as if he was born to know everything. He's the kind of celestial being born to know everything. In front of him, all those who call themselves geniuses will feel inferior." Mora was more and more shocked by Charles's high evaluation. As a CIA agent, Charles was already among the top geniuses. She didn't expect that Caesar's level of genius was even higher. "All right. Go to bed early. We still have to find the whereabouts of the people from the Hellfire Club tomorrow. Charles yawned and walked to his room. He waved at Mora as he said goodbye. Mora was still standing in the same place. No one knew what she was thinking. Right. Charles stopped and said solemnly without looking back, instead of thinking about getting Caesar involved, it's better to look for other mutated humans. If Caesar wanted to make a move, I'm afraid the world situation would have developed in the direction he imagined. After leaving this inexplicable sentence, Charles continued to walk. His figure disappeared around the corner of the corridor, leaving Mora standing quietly in the corridor in a daze. They didn't notice that at the corner of the corridor on the other side, Eric leaned his back against the wall and silently listened to the conversation between the two. Caesar. Eric muttered to himself as he quietly clenched his fist. America, New York, a late-night bar in a city. Looking up at the lively place in front of him, Azo turned to look at Caesar and asked in surprise, "Young master, why did we come to such a place?" "To scout for information," Caesar said matter-of-factly. Azo was taken aback again and said, "You want to scout for information?" "Young master, I can help you sneak into the intelligence databases of various countries to check." "Big Red, what do you know?" Caesar said in annoyance, "That's so boring, unlike here where there is good wine to drink and beautiful women to chat with. And the information I want is not available in the intelligence databases of the major countries. If you want to know why, I've read all of them a few years ago." Azo nodded. "Thanks for the lesson. Then let's go." Caesar walked in front and led Azo, who had put on a hat, into the bar. Caesar was already a regular in most bars and nightclubs in the world. As soon as they entered, a bunny girl led them to an empty seat. Just as they passed by the entertainment hall where people were dancing to their heart's content, Caesar suddenly saw a familiar figure, which made him stop abruptly. "What's wrong, young master?" Noticing his abnormality, Azo also looked over. It could be seen that it was a man in his 30s. His black hair was like the ears of a wolf, and there was a beard on his face that seemed to have experienced the vicissitudes of life. He was wearing a worn-out leather wallet and was sitting alone in a chair, drinking wine. Same kind. Azo narrowed his eyes. With his beast-like sensitivity, he could tell at a glance that the man was a mutated human, and a very dangerous mutated human. "What kind?" The bunny girl beside him asked curiously. "There's nothing for you to do. You can leave first and bring 3 glasses of brandy." Caesar took out a few $100 bills and sent the bunny girl away. The bunny girl didn't mind. She took the $100 bills, swayed her round hips, nodded with a smile, and left. "Let's go." Caesar waved his hand and led Azo to the man. "Young master, this seat is fine. Are you interested in a drink, uncle?" Azo and Caesar, one on the left and one on the right, came to the seat on both sides of the man and surrounded him in the middle. "Get the F***ck out of here." The man was drinking, and after putting down the glass, he directly cursed. His violent temper was obvious. Azo's face changed slightly as he didn't expect the other party to be so rude. "Friend, don't be so angry." Caesar didn't mind. With a smile on his face, he looked at the familiar man in front of him and felt very emotional. He didn't expect to meet him in another time and space. Wolverine, Logan. The lone wolf who is really in the X-Men universe, his family was brutally killed, he turned against his brother, and Wolverine is still wandering. "Get out of here, you little bastard, when did I become your friend?" Logan took out a cigar and lit it, cursing. This sense of familiarity made Caesar smile uncontrollably. "It's hard to say. Maybe in another time and space, we are not only friends, but also family." Chapter 529. 3 days later. Since the battle on the coastal waters a few days ago, the people of the Hellfire Club had hidden in a corner of the world and disappeared. Charles and the others couldn't find a way to deal with it and could only wait patiently at the CIB research base. However, during this period, Eric finally agreed to stay and join the mutated team to fight Shang and the others. The premise was that the initiative of the battle was handed over to the mutated humans and not the UA military. The mutated humans must be dealt with by the mutated humans. This was a temporary consensus. At the same time, in the research base, Hank, who was also a mutated human researcher, finally created a special device for Charles's ability that could control the situation of the mutated humans. Brain expansion machine. It could greatly increase the range and strength of Charles's telepathy ability. Through the expansion of consciousness, he could directly find the mutated humans hidden among ordinary people. Although it was called a machine, it was actually a circular machine fortress that could accommodate up to 10 people. The inner and outer walls of the circular fortress were antennas and electrode plates, and in the middle was a platform equipped with a special helmet. This device must rely on powerful telepathy to use, otherwise, it was equivalent to an unmanned empty shell that couldn't play a corresponding role. At this time, Charles and the others gathered in the brain expansion machine. In theory, after your telepathy is sent to the outside world through the transmitter, the mutated humans will feedback back a unique signal, and the geographical coordinates will be marked on the built-in screen. Hank was a tall and thin young man with a delicate face. He was a refined young man wearing glasses. He explained the precautions while helping Charles put on the helmet connected to dense wires under everyone's gaze. Eric quietly looked at everything inside the machine with a thoughtful look on his face. After seeing Charles put on the helmet, he didn't forget to mock him. "You really look like a cute lab rat. Don't mock me." Charles snorted. "I used to be a lab rat, so I know very well," Eric said lightly. Ruiwen looked at Charles with slight worry, fearing that an accident would happen. "Charles, are you ready?" Hank looked at Charles, who put on the helmet, and pondered. "I suggest you shave your hair, it will be safer." "Let's start, don't even think about touching my hair." Charles glared at him. If he lost his hair at such a young age, how could he be the prince of the nightclub in the future? "Then I'm ready. 3, 2, 1. Hank returned to the control device in front of the screen. After reading the numbers, he pressed the button that acted as a switch. The connected wires lit up one after another, and the helmet at the end suddenly lit up. "Ah!" Charles shouted. Under the enhancement of the brain expansion machine, his consciousness, which was originally restricted to his physical body, seemed to have been sublimated through the transmitter and extended infinitely to the outside world. It was like a god's perspective. Charles suddenly saw the human groups near or far away clearly. Among the billions of people of all shapes and sizes, ordinary people were unlit gray, while mutants were colored with paint, as if stars were dotting the earth. "We're actually not alone." Charles couldn't help but laugh, and he had the urge to cry. He had always thought that mutants were rare, and they were the outliers among humans. But now it seems that the number of mutants is definitely much more than he imagined. It's just that after they found out that they were different, most of them chose to hide and disguise themselves as ordinary people and continue to live. While Charles was looking at the mutated humans that were constantly reflected in his consciousness, the screen of the brain expansion machine was also copying and printing, recording and printing the coordinates of the mutated humans one by one. Charles suddenly frowned, and his telepathy extended to an unknown place. He suddenly saw that among the ordinary people and the mutated humans, there was the most dazzling person. If the mutated humans were the dazzling stars, then the mysterious person who appeared was the radiant sun. Who is it? Just a little peek and he felt a tingling in his brain. Charles gritted his teeth and held on. Relying on the power of the brain expansion machine, he tried to explore forward with his telepathy, trying to see the sun-like figure. Zzz, the current was injected into the helmet along the wires, making the machine run so hard that white-hot smoke rose. Hank looked at the various values and warnings on the screen, looked at Charles in surprise, and shouted, "Charles, what are you doing? The machine has entered a state of high-load operation. Turn it off." Ruiwen panicked. Eric raised his left hand and was ready to unplug all the wires. "Don't turn it off. Let me see it again." Charles stopped them and endured the discomfort of his brain exploding. His telepathy was still moving forward with difficulty. Finally, he gradually saw the back of a muscular man wrapped in the dazzling light. This sense of familiarity, that is, Charles widened his eyes in shock. As if sensing his existence, that person slowly turned around. His eyes seemed to shoot out two beams of light, instantly piercing through all illusions and reality, crossing the distance and directly seeing where he was. Walking on the lawn of the base, Mora was walking toward the brain expansion machine, hoping to see the progress of Charles and the rest of them. But after a deafening explosion, the circular machine fortress before him was like a burnt egg, with thick smoke rising up non-stop. Something happened? Mora's face changed and he quickened his pace. When he came to the gate of the fortress, he saw Eric and Ruiwen supporting Charles, coughing violently as they escaped from the machine. Hank walked at the back. His glasses were crooked, and his hair was a little burnt. Holding a pile of printed papers, he took a long breath and said, "Fortunately, the intelligence files are fine." "Charles, what did you do?" Eric asked in surprise. Charles did not answer, but repeated, it's him, and only him. No wonder, this is the gap that has always existed. It's really, really amazing." He smiled bitterly, then his knees went soft, and he directly fell on the grass in dizziness. United States, New York, underground fighting arena. The fighting arena had been booked, and there were only 3 people inside. Azo and Logan, who had put on their boxing gloves, were exchanging blows with each other. Both of them had 5 senses as sharp as wild beasts and were extremely proficient in close combat. Without using their mutated abilities, it was hard to tell who had the upper hand in a short period of time. Caesar stood below the stage and was still looking behind him. "Kid, do you want to come up and try?" Logan pushed Azo back with a punch and arrogantly hooked his fist at Caesar. "I'll pass." Caesar looked back, shrugged, and continued to watch the show. "I drew unlimited cards at Marvel." Chapter 530. CIA Science and Technology Research Base. After Charles woke up, he didn't mention what he saw with his telepathy, and the others didn't ask again. After some discussion, they decided to look for mutated humans hiding in the ordinary world according to the information they received about the location of mutated humans and train them into a mutated human team with decent combat power to compete with the Hellfire Club. To be on the safe side, Charles, who had telepathy and was good at talking, and Eric, who had magnetic field control and the strongest combat power, went to various places as partners to look for mutated humans who were willing to join. Charles and Selena first came to a nightclub and found a hostess. After Eric showed his mutant ability, Salvador took off his shirt without hesitation and revealed the insect bionic wings hidden on his back. Salvador, female, 38 years old. Mutated ability, has 4 wings that can fly. In the normal state, the wings will be attached to the shoulders like a tattoo. In addition, it can also spit flames and venom. The combat power of this ability can be considered above average. Then, the second mutated human they found was a taxi driver who solicited customers on the busy streets every day. Charles Darwin, male, 35 years old. Mutated ability, the body can self-protect and evolve according to the environment. Whether it was the name or the mutated ability, it seemed very powerful, but because the lower limit of the ability was too low, it could only be regarded as a mascot. The third mutated human was a dangerous prisoner who voluntarily applied for solitary confinement. If it wasn't for the cooperation with the CIA, it wouldn't have been easy for Charles to get him. Alex Summers, male, 30 years old. Mutated ability, the body can emit high-energy light beams and launch a powerful, plasma explosion. But even he can't control the energy explosion and is very easy to lose control. It is an absolute double-edged sword. The fourth mutated human was a college student. Sean Cassidy, male, 19 years old. Mutated ability: the ability to emit sonic attacks that can damage the auditory system of most creatures and even cause great damage to the body. At the same time, it has super hearing and flying ability. Its combat potential is no less than Salvador's. In addition to these four mutants who were willing to try to join, most of the other mutants instinctively resisted after Charles and Selena came to their door. They were unwilling to show their mutant abilities that were different from ordinary people. They believed that this was not an evolution of natural selection, but a negative mutation that was almost deformed. This is also the main concept of mutants at the moment. After all, in this World War II era of the X-Men universe, there is no symbol of peace in Captain America. The belief of superheroes cannot be correctly established, and the greater the ability, the greater the responsibility, has become empty talk. Basically, the mutated humans were all in danger. They were worried about exposing their abilities and being treated as aliens by normal people. How would they be willing to use their abilities to save the world? Charles knew very well that this concept could not be reversed in a short time and could only be changed over time, so he did not persuade the mutants who refused to join. In front of a bar in New York, Charles and Eric stopped in front of the door together. They had already found 4 mutants to join them. In addition to the original Hank and Roy one, as well as the 2 of them, the number of mutants had reached an astonishing 8. It should be here. There should be mutants here. Charles looked down at the map and said. Eric spread out his hands coldly. Let's have a look. If it doesn't work, then forget it. In my opinion, we have enough people. That's true. Charles nodded, stepped forward, and pushed open the door of the bar. The hall was still deserted because it was daytime, and there was only a man in a suit sitting on a chair. The table was full of various bottles and jars, and the man in the suit was wrapped tightly, but he did not wear gloves, revealing a pair of red-skinned hands. He is Shang's man. Charles's eyes widened in surprise, and he recognized at a glance that the man in front of him was the mutant who worked for Shang in the Hellfire Club in Mora's memory. What? When Eric heard that it was the enemy's man, he suddenly tensed up and whispered to confirm, "Are you sure?" Charles said seriously, "It's never wrong. It's him. He has an ability similar to instant transmission. If he is here, the people from the Hellfire Club won't be here too, right?" "Huh. Let's take him down and we'll know." Eric didn't care about anything else. His eyes were already red as he directly stretched out his hands and displayed his magnetic field control ability. Ka. In the hall of the bar, 2 steel pipes used for dancing immediately twisted and shot towards the back of the man in the suit like snakes. Azatso's body was numbed by the alcohol, and only when he heard the sound of wind did he want to teleport and escape. But he was still a step too late, and the 2 steel pipes wrapped around his neck and hands respectively. Don't even think about escaping. Eric's left hand grabbed the air, and the steel pipes increased their strength, strangling Azatso's neck until he couldn't breathe. Don't kill him. Charles stabilized Eric, took a few steps forward, put his finger on his temple, and said to Azatso, "Don't resist, we won't kill you." At the same time, his mind invaded Azatso's brain, trying to find information in his consciousness. Azatso immediately screamed in pain, and his legs kicked the table and chairs over, and the glass bottles and jars fell to the ground. As expected of a trained mutant, his consciousness is a bit difficult to invade. Charles narrowed his eyes and prepared to concentrate, but at that moment, he sensed another person approaching them quickly. "Be careful, there are other mutants." As soon as Charles's warning fell, a black figure rushed into the hall from the door of the bar like a wolf dog. He pounced on Eric, and in the air, 3 white bone claws extended from each of his clenched fists. So fast. Eric was shocked, and his right hand pulled back, and the steel pipes that bound Azatso's hands were automatically released, and he flew towards the attacker. Chi! The wrists of the white bone claws were bound by steel pipes, and the sharp claws that were enough to penetrate the human body stopped about half a centimeter in front of Eric. Eric calmly looked forward, and saw that the person was a strong and tough middle-aged man, with a cigar in his mouth, a white vest, jeans, and a beast-like white bone claws on his left and right hands. It was Logan. With only the steel pipe around his neck left, Azatso was trying to get out of the predicament, but Charles hurriedly interfered with his mind, making him unable to concentrate. For a moment, the four of them were in a desperate stalemate. Creak, at this time. The door of the bar was opened again, and the four people in the hall were shocked, and they all looked at the door, only to see Caesar in casual clothes walking in. Chapter 531. On the streets of New York, inside a bar with a "closed" sign on the door. The bar owner was still in a state of shock. He slightly cleaned the glass fragments on the floor and secretly looked up at the table in the middle of the hall. On the wooden square table full of drinks, 5 people dressed differently sat in a circle. The atmosphere was silent and strange. Caesar sat in the middle of the main seat, with Charles and Eric on his left, and Azazo and Logan on his right. So, it was just a misunderstanding? Logan smoked a cigar and exhaled smoke. He seemed absent-minded, but his eyes never left Charles and Eric. Years of wild beast instinct and the brief contact just now told him that the two people in front of him were not simple. At least, their mutated abilities were very difficult to deal with. He almost killed me. Azazo stared at Eric, gritted his teeth, and touched his neck with his left hand. There were obvious steel pipe marks left on his neck. If you still want to fight, I'll accompany you to the end. Eric crossed his arms and said coldly without showing any weakness. No matter what, the other party was someone who once worked under Shang. He even felt a little regretful that he didn't decisively kill him just now. You. Azazo's eyes were cold. If Caesar wasn't present, he would have already fought back. Why would he sit on the chair and negotiate? The bar was filled with the smell of gunpowder. As long as the fuse was lit, it would be enough to ignite the area. Calm down first. Charles clapped his hands helplessly and used his telekinesis to fill the glasses on the table with drinks and moved the glasses in front of everyone. However, Azazo, Eric, and Logan were all a little hot-tempered. No one was willing to submit to anyone, and they didn't give Charles much face. They still maintained their vigilance and hostility. In this situation where the situation was out of control, Caesar finally said, "Okay, quiet down." It was a very simple sentence, without any superpower or coercion, but it made Azazo and the other two quiet down. Seeing this, Charles breathed a sigh of relief and looked at Caesar gratefully. Then, he organized his words and asked, "Why are the three of you together? After all, no matter how you look at it. Caesar, Azazo, and Logan, the three of them were a very strange combination." Azazo turned his face away and said, "It's simple. I have left the Hellfire Club and chose to follow young Master Caesar." Huh? Charles and Eric looked at each other. This was good news for them. That's the truth. He's as annoying as a dog. Since everyone is Caesar's friend, then what happened just now was a misunderstanding. But Charles changed the topic and looked at Azazo. He used to work for Shang. Caesar. We hope that he can provide us with information about Shang and the Hellfire Club. Azazo looked at Caesar. After Caesar nodded, he said in a deep voice, "Shang, how do I put it? He does things very well. He didn't reveal everything to me. During World War II, he was an officer in the Nazi concentration camp. He was dedicated to cultivating mutants and putting them into the ranks of the war machines." Azazo looked at the number on Eric's left arm. The number on your arm. You used to be a part of the concentration camp, right? Eric's face was gloomy. His mother was shot and his companions were buried alive. He couldn't bear to look back on his childhood memories. Logan looked up and blew out a mouthful of smoke. Not to mention World War II, even in World War I, he was a war machine and was thrown into the war between the big countries. Now, he was physically and mentally exhausted and hated war. That was why he wandered like a zombie. Azazo continued, at the end of World War II, Germany was defeated and surrendered. The concentration camp was naturally disbanded. Shang formed the Hellfire Club and secretly cultivated the mutants, wanting to start World War III again. Charles nodded thoughtfully. So you intervened in the high-level decision-making of the UA military and wanted the UA to provoke the Soviet Union and push forward the original stalemate of the Cold War. But why did he do this? What good did a world war do for him? Azazo spread out his hands and explained, Shang. He thought that mutants were superior and that it was the natural trend of evolution. So he wanted the big countries to kill each other and lead the mutants to rule the world. Caesar, who was listening on the side, was speechless. Sure enough, no matter which time and space, there were one or two villains who wanted to rule the world. It was just that the one over there was the Red Skull of the Hydra organization, and the one over here was Shang of the Hellfire Club. Enough, these are not important. Eric slammed the table and said coldly, tell me, Shang and the others fled in the submarine. Where are they hiding now? Submarine, Azazo muttered and pondered, I remember Shang said. Yes, the North Pole. If it was a submarine, they would drive directly to the North Pole. Charles's eyes lit up and said, the North Pole? Very likely. There is no one there and it has not been infiltrated by military forces. Eric stood up from his chair and walked straight to the door. Eric. What are you going to do? Charles asked loudly. Eric said matter-of-factly, of course I'm going to the North Pole and kill him. Come on. This time, before Charles could speak, Azazo shook his head and said, Shang is more powerful than you think. Among the mutants, he is definitely one of the best. Not to mention, there is also White Empress and Jiliu. They are all good at fighting. Not to mention you alone, even if you add a dozen mutants, you may not be able to win. Mutants who have not received combat training are no better than ordinary people. Once they encounter mutants who have developed abilities for combat, 10 may not be able to defeat one. Unless, Azazo secretly glanced at Caesar and did not say anything else. If the young master makes a move, all the problems will not be a problem. Eric, I understand how you feel, but being anxious is not a solution. Charles stepped forward, patted Eric on the shoulder, and persuaded, first, accurately lock onto the opponent's position and train the mutants who join our camp. I believe we will be able to win. Eric was silent. Yes, I forgot to say. Azazo added, Shang will not sit still and wait for you to train the mutants. If he knows that you are recruiting mutants, he will definitely take the initiative to attack. Don't worry. That's why I went out with Eric. Charles was halfway through his sentence when he suddenly stopped. His face quickly turned pale. He then looked at Eric and said in a daze, no way. Is the base? Your home seems to be gone, Caesar said calmly. Chapter 532. CIA Research Base Center. After Charles and Eric left, only the original owner, Hank, and Raven were left in charge of the residential area for mutants. There were also the new members, Salvador, Charles Darwin, Alex, and Sean. In the building hall on the first floor, everyone gathered together to talk about mutants. Perhaps because everyone was a mutant, everyone was open and quickly became friends who could talk about anything. I didn't think that there would be so many mutants other than me and Charles. Ruiwen sighed. She had been using the appearance of an ordinary woman. She sat intimately with the researcher, Hank, with a happy and satisfied smile on her face. Me too. So before you came, even the officer didn't know my identity as a mutant. Hank only had eyes for Ruiwan and smiled. Yeah, knowing that you're not the only one, that you're not alone, that's really a fortunate thing. Salvador and the others also had smiles on their faces. This might be one of the main reasons why they chose to join. Right. Charles Darwin suggested, since it's rare for us to get together, why don't we each show off our mutant abilities? I have no objections. Salvador smiled. Okay. Ruiwan had no objections, and the others nodded in agreement. Since everyone present was of the same kind, there was no need to hide. I suggested it, so I'll go first. The black driver, Charles Darwin, was very straightforward. Under everyone's gaze, he got up from the sofa, went to the fish tank against the wall, and completely submerged his head in the water. After holding his breath for a few seconds, Charles Darwin's face changed and gills grew. Clearly, he could survive in the water for a long time. This was one of the specific manifestations of the environmental adaptation mutant ability. Everyone was amazed by it. After one person showed off his ability, the others no longer hid. Hank took off his shoes and socks, revealing his beast-like feet. Ruiwan transformed into other people, and even their voices and expressions were exactly the same. Salvador took off his shirt, transformed into his four wings and floated in the air, and spat out a mouthful of highly toxic saliva that could corrode stone statues. Sean opened his mouth and shouted out a wave of ultrasound that directly shattered the floor-to-ceiling glass window in the hall. Finally, it was Alex's turn. Under everyone's expectant gaze, he could only leave the hall and come to the empty yard. Even I can't control this ability. Be careful. Alex asked the others to hide behind the wall, and he came to the center of the yard. After taking a deep breath, his body suddenly emitted a bright high-energy beam. The high-energy beam fell on the grass, plowed a deep trench, and plowed a deep trench. Hank and the others had been peeking from behind the wall and were almost hit by the high-energy beam. They looked at the area around Alex's body that was in a mess after being attacked indiscriminately. They all gasped in unison. The people who were showing off their mutant abilities didn't notice that at this moment, the door of the CIA's research base was being attacked by a powerful force of mutants. Dash, a violent tornado appeared outside the door and rushed in a straight line towards the base gate. The gate of the fortress, which was strong enough to withstand the attack of military power, was defeated by this natural disaster. The iron gate, walls, statues, Secret Service soldiers, everything that stood in the way of the tornado was sucked into it and thrown into the endless sky along with the tornado. The main hall is being invaded by an external force. There is only one person on the other side. Attention, there is only one person on the other side. The alarm rang in every corner. When the fully armed Secret Service agents rushed to the main hall to surround it, they only saw a middle-aged man in a suit and a metal helmet walking in fearlessly. Stop, or I'll shoot. Officer Jenner walked at the front, took out a special pistol and aimed at Shang, who had no anti-theft measures. You can shoot. Shang didn't stop and continued to move forward. Officer Jenner gritted his teeth and pulled the trigger. A few shots at close range hit Shang's chest accurately. But even the suit jacket Shang was wearing didn't break through the defense. It was as if the kinetic energy contained in the bullets was absorbed the moment they came into contact with Shang's body. Shang smiled coldly and came to the front of Officer Jenner. He grabbed his neck with one hand and released the absorbed kinetic energy from his palm. Officer Jenner's bloated body immediately flew out. Sir! Shoot him! The eyes of the Secret Service agents who were watching from the side were red. They loaded their rifles and fired a series of bullets at Shang. Shang stayed in place and didn't move, allowing the bullets to hit him. When the bullets landed on his body, all of the kinetic energy was lost and didn't cause any damage. Several Secret Service agents saw that the bullets were ineffective and took out the rocket launchers they carried with them. They aimed at Shang and fired wildly. Shang sneered at his success. The rocket launcher with a trail of flames landed on his body. Before it could explode, it was pressed into a ball by Shang's hands and absorbed into his body as nutrients. Now, it's my turn. Shang Yi took a step forward, and the ground within a 3-meter radius immediately cracked into lava. A powerful shockwave rushed toward the agents, drowning them like a tidal wave. Even the wall of the building behind them was blasted into a large hole. Boom! 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 The ground within the range of the base was shaking non-stop. Due to the confrontation between the mutated human forces and the Secret Service agents in the base, the scene was extremely chaotic. Ruiwan and the others who had not undergone combat training were running in all directions in the hallway. Stop her! A team of Secret Service agents didn't encounter Shang, the Terminator of firearms, but they encountered White Empress. Transforming into a diamond body, White Empress walked gracefully in the courtyard as bullets landed on her body. White Empress looked at them coldly. She opened her hands and released a mental attack. The Secret Service agents held their heads and fell to the ground like wheat. On the other side of the base, the tornado was still raging. A non-mainstream young man slowly walked out from it. Shang, White Empress, and Ji Lu dealt with all the Secret Service agents in the base quickly. The three of them came from different directions and came to the hall where Ruiwan and the others were. Everyone, like me, high-level humans. Shang took off his steel helmet and looked at Ruiwan and the others who were gathered together. He smiled and said, "I won't hurt you. Or rather, I won't hurt my own kind." Ruiwan and the others didn't speak. They looked at Shang vigilantly. Shang smiled and said, "Everyone, a revolution of the mutated human is about to begin. Once our abilities are exposed, we will either become the slaves or guinea pigs of the ordinary people or become the rulers of the new world. Do you want to be slaves or kings? Choose. If you want to stay and fight for the ordinary people, stay where you are. If you want to join us, just come over." As soon as Shang's words fell, Ruiwan and the others' faces changed. Some of them were already tempted. This was also the main purpose of Shang's attack. He didn't want to kill the mutated humans recruited by Charles. Instead, he wanted to plant a seed in their hearts that would betray them and fight for the mutated humans at any time. Chapter 533. Other than the residential building in the middle of the base that was relatively intact, the rest of the base was in ruins. Smoke and fire could be seen everywhere, and the bodies of agents were strewn all over the ground. After Shang unexpectedly expressed his intentions, Ruiwan and the others fell silent. Everyone's heart was shaken. No one? Forget it, let's go. Seeing that no one came out, Shang did not show any disappointment. He turned around and walked out of the broken floor-to-ceiling window. White Empress and Jiliu followed him on his left and right. Wait a minute. After Shang's group walked into the courtyard, Ruiwan and the others finally walked out. Salvador, it's you? Charles Darwin's eyes widened in disbelief. The one who decided to stand with Shang was the nightclub girl, Salvador. You don't know, but I actually hate humans. Instead of fighting for them, it's better to fight for the mutants and myself. Salvador smiled faintly and walked out of the window with a determined heart. Shang also extended his hand to her and accepted her happily. Welcome to the club. May I ask, what is your mutant ability? After untying her clothes, Salvador stretched out her 4 wings. Her feet left the ground and her whole body floated low in the air. White Empress and Jiliu looked at her in surprise. Flying, not bad, not bad. You're like an angel. Your code name will be Angel from now on. Shang took out a remote control button from his pocket. After pressing it, a strong wind blew down and a retro fighter jet slowly landed on the square behind them. After losing Red Devil Azatso, the Hellfire Club could only rely on various means of transportation to move. This was also a helpless move. "Let's go." Shang patted Salvador's shoulder and led her to the rear cabin of the fighter jet. Charles Darwin saw that Salvador was really going to go with Shang. This time, he was really anxious. "In a hurry," he said, "wait, I'll join too." As he said that, he walked out of the hall. Shang turned around and looked at Charles Darwin. He nodded and said, "Oh. Welcome, what is your ability?" "Adapt to the environment. My body can change into different forms according to the environment." Charles Darwin walked very slowly, deliberately stalling for time. He glanced at Alex from the corner of his eyes, and Alex instantly understood what he meant. Since their combat experience was not proportional, all they had to do was to use their strongest skills to mindlessly kill the other party's leader. "Oh." Shang keenly caught a trace of something wrong. Charles Darwin continued to approach him. Alex, who was hiding behind him, quietly raised his hand. When he was 2 meters away, Charles Darwin suddenly moved aside and shouted, "Alex, now!" Buzz, a high-energy beam as bright as day, like an energy blade, slashed towards Shang with extreme speed. Shang gently shook his head. He, who was already prepared, subconsciously stretched out his hands and directly disintegrated and absorbed the high-energy beam. This? Charles Darwin's face changed drastically. He was already considered very powerful, but he still lost because he did not have enough information. He did not know what Shang's ability was. "I hate being lied to. Adapt to the environment, right? I hope you can adapt to this." Shang's face was indifferent. He took a step forward, and a faint light appeared on his finger. He pointed it at Charles Darwin's chest. He then turned around and led the newly joined Salvador, White Empress, and Jiliu into the rear cabin of the fighter jet. The engine was ignited and the fighter jet hummed. It floated up and flew towards the end of the sky in the north, leaving behind a mess of the research base. Plop! Charles Darwin stared blankly at the fighter jet as it disappeared into the distance. He suddenly knelt on the ground, and his chest began to ignite from the inside out. It was a high-energy beam that was about to explode. Charles Darwin, Roy 1, Hank, Alex, and Sean rushed towards Charles Darwin anxiously to check on his condition. "Don't come over." Charles Darwin coughed violently and reached out to stop them. His entire upper body had been infected by the internal energy. If it were not for his ability, he would have exploded like a human bomb. However, his ability to adapt naturally could not withstand the violent energy. It was only a matter of time before he died. Charles Darwin, Hank pulled Roy 1, who was crying. They stopped a few meters away and could only watch as Charles Darwin's life came to an end. "In our next life, let's be friends for a longer time." The surface of his upper body was about to explode. Charles Darwin forced a smile. At the last moment when the energy in his body was about to explode, his vision blurred. He inexplicably saw the figure of a golden-haired young man appear. Was it an illusion? Charles Darwin's consciousness was blurred. He saw the golden-haired young man stretch out 2 fingers and point at the left side of his chest where his heart was. In just an instant, the violent high-energy beam energy in his body immediately became extremely docile. Then, it flowed along his body and flowed to the young man's fingertips. Charles Darwin looked at his chest in a daze. The energy in his body had been absorbed by the countercurrent. He could not help but open his mouth wide. "I am fine. If I came 1 step later, you would have been gone." Caesar calmly withdrew his 2 fingers. He looked at Charles Darwin, who was kneeling in front of him, and shrugged. "You are Caesar?" Roy covered her mouth in surprise. Before she could ask, a red flame appeared on the square, and several figures appeared. Azatso stood in the middle, and on both sides were Charles, Eric, and Logan. "Young master, you're faster." Azatso saw Caesar, who arrived first, and sighed. Just a little, those people have already run away. Caesar raised his head and looked in the direction where the fighter jet left. Those bastards. Charles's face was pale. He clenched his fists and glanced at the ruins of the base that were full of corpses. This time, it was undoubtedly a warning from the Hellfire Club. Charles. Jenna is dead, and Salvador has joined the Hellfire Club. Ruewen sobbed sadly. Hank gently held her shoulder. The others also looked pessimistic. The battle had not yet begun, and they had already lost half of their combat power. This was not a good start. Caesar. Charles took a deep breath, looked sideways at Caesar, and pleaded, "I hope you can stay and help us. If it's to deal with Shang and the others, forgive me for refusing," Caesar said calmly. He was just a wanderer from a different time and space. He did not want to intervene too much in the disputes of this time and space. After all, if he took action, Shang would have died just now, and even the people of the Hellfire Club would not be spared. But by doing so, would the world become better? Not necessarily. On the contrary, the people of this time and space would become dependent on him. One day, when he completely left this world, a new villain would be born, and disasters and wars would occur one after another. No, I don't need you to deal with Shang, and I don't need you to intervene in this battle of the mutated humans. Charles's eyes were sincere as he looked directly at Caesar. He said in a deep voice, "I want you to be the teacher we recruited, and teach us how to use our abilities in battle." Chapter 534. The next day, in the morning. Hank, Ruewen, Sean, Charles Darwin, and Alex had changed into their student uniforms and were standing on one side of the spacious open field. On the other side of the field were the casually dressed Caesar, Azazo, and Logan. Eric was not there, and only Charles stood in the middle of the two groups. "All right, apprentices." Charles clapped his hands and gestured for Hank and the rest to focus. He then gestured to Caesar and the other two. "These three teachers will teach you how to fight in the future." As soon as these words were spoken, Hank and the others looked at each other and whispered to each other. "Those two look pretty strong." Sean looked at the fierce-looking Azazo and Logan, then looked at the completely different type of young man, Caesar. He muttered softly, "But the one on the far left, he can't be younger than me, right? How can he be our teacher?" Hey, Sean, are you kidding? Don't be fooled by his harmless appearance." Ruewen shook her head helplessly at Sean's doubts. "Indeed." Hank looked directly at the harmless Caesar. His beast-like intuition made all the hair on his body stand on end. His voice trembled slightly as he said hoarsely, "The other two make me feel like two ferocious beasts. They're extremely ferocious and difficult to deal with. Only he makes me feel like I'm facing a huge mountain. It's so heavy that I can't breathe." Alex also stared fixedly at Caesar and nodded. "They're right, Sean. Among the three of them, the most powerful one should be that one. He's my savior, after all. Of course he's strong." Charles Darwin grinned. If not for Caesar's timely arrival, he would not even have a corpse left. "All right, silence. Listen to my introduction." Charles's voice rang in the minds of the students. He then pointed at Logan and introduced him. "This is Teacher Logan. He has participated in large-scale wars in World War I and World War II and has been through hundreds of battles. He will teach you all various fighting techniques and improve your combat abilities." Logan raised his head slightly and subconsciously touched his pocket, wanting to smoke again. Charles pointed at Azazo beside him and continued his introduction. "This is Teacher Azazo. He used to work under Shang, and now he's following Caesar. He's very good at surprise attacks and will teach you how to defend yourself. As for the third teacher, it's actually me." Charles patted his chest and said, I will help you all develop and improve your mutated abilities and apply them in actual combat." When Charles introduced himself, Logan yawned slightly and looked at Caesar. He said uninterestedly, "You want to train these mutated humans. Why did you drag me into this? Then do you have anything to do?" Caesar shrugged. "Drinking," Logan said seriously. "That's not A's." Caesar said and looked at Azazo. Azazo said seriously, "I'll do whatever the young master does." Caesar said to Logan, "Since you have nothing to do, it's good to kill some time. With your abilities, if you don't want to fight and kill, you can always teach the rookie mutated humans. Maybe one day, you won't want to leave and want to stay and be a teacher." "That's impossible." Logan's reply was firm and decisive. "Let's just wait and see." Caesar smiled. No one could escape the law of true fragrance. After Charles introduced himself, he pointed at Caesar. "And the last one, Teacher Caesar. He's an old friend I've known since I was young. You can use your mutated abilities at will and train with him freely. One-on-one or one-on-one, as long as you can defeat him, you'll complete the training." Wow, the students were in an uproar when they heard that and looked at Caesar in surprise. "Are you serious? We have to defeat the young master to complete the training?" Azazo rolled his eyes. This was much more difficult than dealing with the Hellfire Club. "Charles, you're scheming against me." Caesar glanced at Charles. Charles chuckled and looked like he was going to use everything he had. "Okay, you don't have to defeat me. Just reduce the difficulty." Caesar sighed softly and put his left hand into his pocket. With a jingling sound, he took out a string of bells and tied them to his waist. "I have 3 bells with me. From now on, only you can get one of them and you'll pass the training. Of course, you can use your mutated abilities at will during this process. If you can hurt me, you'll win." Caesar's words were not arrogant, but he was confident to a terrifying extent. "Anytime, anywhere, and you can combine them freely and use your abilities at will. You just have to get one of the bells." Ruiwen muttered to herself. It sounded too simple, but the opponent with the bells was Caesar. "Teacher Caesar, are you serious?" Sean looked indignant as he stared at the bells on Caesar's waist. "You can try if you don't believe me." Caesar smiled brightly. Azazo, who was beside him, subconsciously stepped back. Logan also shuddered and quietly moved a few steps to the side. No one knew that a few days ago. Under Logan's constant provocation, Caesar finally put on his boxing gloves and walked into the combat ring. Then, there was no then. Logan only knew that if it were not for his super strong self-healing ability, he would probably still be lying in bed on his last breath. Sean looked at the others, and the other students also looked at him. The 5 of them nodded to each other. "Then, let's go together." Sean took a deep breath. He suddenly opened his mouth and shouted at Caesar, who was about 10 meters away, with a sharp, ear-piercing sound wave to suppress him. This was like a signal to start the battle. Hank and Ruiwen moved at the same time. They lowered their bodies slightly and rushed at Caesar at high speed, one on the left and one on the right. Oh! Not a bad sound wave attack. Caesar was surrounded by the sound waves, but he stood still and let the sound waves wash over him. He was unharmed. Only the bells were shaking crazily, but his left hand quickly blocked the bells. Chi, a few blinding high-energy light beams, wrapped in the sound waves, rushed at Caesar's body. Alex's high-energy light beams could not accurately hit the target, but as long as they accumulated in numbers, they could still achieve a considerable effect. Caesar freed his hands and crossed them in defense. But when the destructive light beams landed on his arms, they only tore his shirt slightly, revealing his steel-like body. Ding-dong! But another wave of sound waves swept over. A bell finally broke free from his waist and was thrown high behind Caesar. Got it! Ruiwen, who had arrived at Caesar's side, jumped and reached out, almost grabbing the bell in her hands. But the bell disappeared in the blink of an eye. Instead, it was replaced by Caesar's harmless smile. "Little Ruiwen, you've underestimated me." He punched forward, but before it landed on Ruiwen's body, the air blast from his punch sent Ruiwen's delicate body flying a few meters. She fell to the ground and fainted. "Damn it! You bastard!" Hank saw that Ruiwen was sent flying. He was furious. His clenched fist seemed to have become bigger, and he violently punched at Caesar's head. "You should go too." Caesar pouted and quickly dodged the fist. He flicked his finger and hit Hank's forehead between his eyebrows, causing him to flip a few times in the air and then fall to the ground next to Ruiwen. Everything happened in a flash. In the blink of an eye, Ruiwen and Hank fainted and fell to the ground. Chapter 535. Are you kidding me? What just happened? Looking at Hank and Charles, who had collapsed in front of him, Sean's eyes widened in horror. For a moment, he even forgot to continue shouting for ultrasound to suppress them. Everything had happened too quickly. A moment ago, he had thought that he had won, but in the next moment, the two of them had collapsed unconscious on the ground. It's Professor Caesar. What astonishing speed! Among these mutated students, only Charles Darwin could barely see Caesar's attack. Due to his ability to adapt to the environment, his eyes glowed with patterns, enhancing his dynamic vision. Alex looked at Caesar, who was 10 meters away, and quickly reminded him, "Sean, don't stop. Continue to use ultrasound to suppress them." "Oh, right." Sean took a deep breath and was about to shout for ultrasound in front of him, but his vision blurred. Caesar, who had been standing in front of him, had mysteriously disappeared. This made him unable to breathe. "Sean! Be careful, behind you." Charles Darwin's warning was urgent and loud. Sean instinctively turned around and saw a finger approaching from afar. It seemed to be gently tapping between his eyebrows, but it contained an unpredictable extraordinary power. Bam! Sean's head throbbed with a splitting headache. His eyes rolled back, and he almost fainted. He fell to the ground, unconscious. And this was because Caesar had stopped at the last moment. Otherwise, his entire head would have exploded. "Charles Darwin, get out of the way!" Alex shouted. He spun and accumulated a high-energy light beam, but when he saw Sean beside Caesar, he hesitated and did not release it. In this short moment of hesitation, Caesar had already arrived in front of him. He controlled his strength and punched Sean's lower abdomen. Alex immediately bent his body and knelt on the ground. He vomited so much that he even coughed up bile. He fell unconscious, and the high-energy light beam on his body dimmed and disappeared. That. Charles Darwin's body formed a biological defense shell. He looked at the people beside Caesar, who were lying on the ground in all kinds of miserable states. His mouth was dry, and he swallowed his saliva. He suggested with a bitter smile, "Can I surrender?" As soon as he finished speaking, a gust of wind blew in his face. Charles Darwin closed his eyes and opened them again. He realized that Caesar had already come to his side and placed his hand on his shoulder. "We'll advance and retreat together. How can you be the only exception?" "I understand. Be gentle, be gentle." Charles Darwin's tanned face turned even darker. Caesar bent his finger and gently tapped Charles Darwin's head. Charles Darwin stuck out his tongue and fell straight to the ground. The entire process took less than a minute, and it was an absolute one-sided victory. Only Caesar was left standing, while the other 5 mutated students had all fainted on the ground and lost their ability to fight. This can't even be considered a warm-up. Caesar shook his head helplessly, and then he looked at Azazo and Logan, who were watching from the side, and said casually, "Do both of you want to participate as well? It wouldn't be bad to move around a little." Logan and Azazo looked at each other and had the same thought in their eyes: participate, my ass. They were going to be human sandbags. If the students woke up later and found that both of their teachers had collapsed, it would be really embarrassing. Well, I'll go drink first. Let me know when they wake up. Logan waved his hand, found an excuse, and quickly left the base square. Caesar's gaze naturally fell on Azazo. Azazo panicked and hurriedly said, "Young master, I want to move them back to the dormitory. It's not good for them to catch a cold lying on the ground." "Okay then." Caesar pouted and crossed his arms in front of his chest. He looked like he hadn't had enough yet. Sure enough, letting him stay was the best choice. Charles revealed a relieved smile. With Caesar around, not only did they have more people to train the mutated students, but they also had more top combat power to defend the base. If anyone dared to cause trouble at the base, they would see what hell was like. After Agent Mora returned to the base, she found that all the students were lying in the residential infirmary. After sleeping for half a day, they began to wake up one by one. The first to wake up was Hank, who had the blood of a beast flowing in his veins, followed by Charles Darwin, who had strong adaptability, and then Rui Wan and the others, who didn't have any physical enhancements due to their mutated genes. Recalling the scene of fighting against Caesar, everyone was greatly stimulated and didn't try to challenge Caesar again. Instead, they sensibly asked Logan and Azazo for advice on the essentials of battle. Charles, on the other hand, focused on their mutated abilities and explored the possibilities of using them in battle. Their daily teaching routine was officially on track. Time passed day by day. The afternoon of the third day. Caesar sat alone in his training room. In contrast to the lively training rooms of Logan and Azazo, his room was very quiet. No one dared to come and snatch the bell. Another boring day. Caesar yawned and stretched. Just as he was about to go back to sleep, there was a sound of footsteps at the door. The door of the training room was pushed open, and a tall young man stepped in. His face was indifferent as he stared straight at Caesar, who was standing on the podium. "Oh, it's you?" Caesar looked at the newcomer with a surprised expression. Eric narrowed his eyes. "Why, are you surprised that I'm here?" "On the contrary. What I'm curious about is why you waited until now to come." Caesar smiled and tapped the bell hanging on his waist with his finger. "You want to try too?" Eric shook his head and said coldly, "I don't want to play that kind of trick. I want you to use your real strength. I want to test the gap in strength between the current me and you." "Then take off the bell first," Caesar insisted. "Okay." Eric's eyes turned cold. He opened his left palm and grabbed at the air. The bell hanging on Caesar's waist was attracted by a magnetic force and quickly broke free and flew toward him. "It's not that simple." Caesar smiled. His hand reached out like lightning and caught the 3 flying bells in his hand. "Huh?" Eric's face changed slightly. No matter how he used his magnetic field ability to control the iron bell in Caesar's hand, the bell couldn't break free. Even his fingers couldn't move it at all. "Sure enough, you're the strongest." Eric sneered. He opened his hands and shouted. Suddenly, the whole training room and even the whole training building trembled due to the action of the steel bars. "What's the matter? Is it an external attack?" On the other side, in the training room where Azazo was, a group of students swayed along with the earthquake. They looked at the crumbling ceiling in horror. "It's neither. It feels like the two of them are fighting," Azazo muttered to himself. He reacted quickly and supported Rui Wan. He then said to the other students, "Take my hand. I'll take you out of here first." In the training room on the second floor. The steel bars with cement combined into a big iron ball and completely enveloped Caesar. Eric, who had completed all this, was sweating profusely. He kept his hands clenched in the air and continued to shrink the iron ball inch by inch. He wanted to crush Caesar inside into meat paste. Bang! As if it had been hit by a super-strong shock wave, a fist-shaped hole was directly broken in the iron ball. Caesar walked out of it unscathed and gestured to the bell in his hand. Please put more effort into it. It's still too early for you to get the bell. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.